quite sure he's right. An obsession in neurotic. Pretty dangerous, in fact.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Do you mean you doubt your powers to convince him?
Say it! Say it!
All right, I'll say it.
Worse than that. What I'm afraid of is his power to convince me.
We're talking about putting a manifestly irresponsible man on national television.
Sweetheart, be reasonable.
War. This is the end game.
All right, it is Monday, April 28th, 2025, the 99th day of the Golden Age. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. Today, just to get this settled at the top of the show, today is probably the only episode for this week because of GART. And you might have seen that in the Substack post. But if not, this is probably the only episode I'll be able to do this week. There's a chance that I'll do one tomorrow. There's a chance that I'll do one Thursday. But it's very likely that today's the only one. So let's have a great time. Now, you might see that the title of today's show is The Ruler. And on Friday, we talked about the rules. And we started with a Substack post by Nick Land from a few years ago talking about rule sets and gamifying systems and how everything was becoming gamified, simulation or not. And one of the key lines from that was that making the rules, attempting to make the rules is war, one of the key lines and one of the key concepts. And so I framed the show that way and talked about how we are essentially in a war like that, where we are switching between rule sets. The rule set we thought we lived under is clearly misdescribed at best. And I made the argument that, of course, as I have many times, that the Constitution has been inverted. We are not in the constitutional republic of the founders. We are not in the constitutional republic we were told we lived in as we were growing up. All of that is gone by the wayside. If it ever existed, it doesn't exist now. And there's no point in clinging to it as though it does. So what we need to do is either unwind that and get back to the beginning, or we need to move to a parallel rule set. And what's going to ultimately determine which direction we go is what people are prepared to get on board with to a pretty large degree. And I think that that's the purpose of the information war. The propaganda got the people of the country and the people of the world to commit to that inverted rule set. And now we are reversing that, or we are just switching to a new rule set, but it's going to be some measure of public consensus that dictates which direction we go. And it matters who's leading those efforts. And so on our side, of course, that leader is Donald Trump. And we're going to go through some of the aspects of Trump's leadership and also some of the alternatives to potentially lead this world if Donald Trump does not prove victorious. Now, or if somehow the small chance occurs where he is just leading us into that ultimate dystopia. I don't think he is, but it's important to be conscious of that, and it's important to see what the opposition actually looks like. Now, Back in December, I did an episode called King of the World and talked about how Donald Trump, at least optically, if nothing else, was clearly being presented in his visit to the Notre Dame Cathedral as King of the World. I don't think that that is a stretch at all. I think that's what that optics-oriented event was for. Nothing else. Present Donald Trump as King of the World. He manhandled Emmanuel Macron. We talked about that at length. When he shakes his hand, he just throws Macron around like a rag doll. And he was doing that pretty frequently at the time. But everyone defers to Donald Trump. People crowd around him. They want to have their pictures taken with him. They want to talk to him. They want to get on his good side. He gets the prime seating locations, whereas the so-called king of the United Kingdom and the prime minister of the UK are just off elsewhere, irrelevant. And so I suggested Wednesday of last week that we were going to have another opportunity to see that dynamic playing out before us as Donald Trump attends the funeral of Pope Francis, who died either a week ago or a few months ago or a few years ago, or who really knows. He is the Joe Biden of the papacy. So he went, Donald Trump did, to Rome this week, and he wore a blue suit. And the media freaked out because they were like, everybody's supposed to wear a black suit and a black tie. And Donald Trump wore a blue suit and a blue tie. How could he? This is so uncouth. He's making us look foolish. A perfect example of a party of false decorum standard, a dress code. You're supposed to dress this way for this sort of occasion. And if you violate that, well, then you've violated some higher code. The dress code is a recommendation so that you are presented properly within another construct. And all of this based on the projection of abstract power. Well, Donald Trump projected abstract power by saying, I don't conform to your dress code. And of course, they gave him prime seating locations. And there were a slew of iconic pictures taken. The main one being Donald Trump and the comedic actor from Ukraine sitting across from one another on just totally normal looking conference chairs, apparently having a powwow about the future of Ukraine and the Ukraine war, which means the future of the world and the balance. And if we get to it, we'll talk about some of that stuff later. But I just wanted to share this for the optics alone. You may have heard John and I discuss some of this briefly on Devolution Power Hour over the weekend. But watch what happens as they are arranging the chairs here. So there's Emmanuel Macron giving the kind of bro greeting to Volodymyr Zelensky, and Trump kind of takes a very fatherly physical stance with the two of them. And there were 3 chairs initially, as you can see right there. And at the end, there were only 2. There was a chair for Trump and a chair for Zelensky. And Macron was not involved with the meeting. Manhandled once again. Donald Trump presented as King of the World once again. Donald Trump is the one there meeting with the comedic actor who is an avatar, but still a relevant avatar, particularly to people who support Ukraine, whatever that means. Just means they're Trump deranged and can't get past what the TV says. So we have the Pope's funeral. We talked about the Pope pretty extensively last Monday. This is the Associated Press. We're just going to go for this headline just quickly to update. Conclave to elect a new Pope will start on May 7th. And so that would be, I guess, next Thursday. And these people in these costumes will walk past these people in these costumes. And then if they are not yet 80 years of age, they can cast a vote for who will be the next pope. And we are supposed to believe that these elections are real and legitimate. They just go and they represent their own interests and they try to make the best choice for who's going to be the best pope. I don't know, obviously, what's going on behind the scenes, but the idea that the Vatican is as powerful as it once was is preposterous. Pope Francis seems to be the Joe Biden, the kind of stand-in, the guy that they put there to take the heat for everything that collapses during his reign. The reputation of the institution that was created by the regime, that reputation, I mean, collapses around kind of the peak version of what the regime's agenda represents and what direction they're trying to take things. Joe Biden, for all of his illegitimacy and incompetence and potentially dementia or whatever else, tried to install under his name, tried to install the most regime-oriented agenda that the country has ever seen. That's what was coming out of the administration, coming out of the reporting. That's what the public understands. And, you know, people on that side think that Joe Biden was very effective in doing all that because, of course, they want to see that agenda succeed. And I would suggest that the average American who wants to see that agenda succeed has no understanding of that agenda and has probably never thought about what it would mean for that agenda to succeed. They just think that if people like them are in control, those people being like them are going to take care of them. And so no matter what the agenda is, if it destroys everybody else, that's fine because those people are the enemies, but they'll look after us because we're the ones who supported them. We're the ones who went out and voted for them. They can't afford to lose us. If you're the sort of person who still believes that, you should remember that they're the ones who told you and convinced you and had you do it because you did do it to inject yourselves with a toxic experimental substance that can't protect you from a disease that can't kill you. And if they were willing to risk that, I don't think that they care about your votes. That said, I guess we'll see what the results are. I would expect, there's no point in predicting. I would expect that we are going to get something that heads back in the direction we see the rest of the world shifting. I don't think the same about Canada, by the way, and we'll hopefully get to a little bit of Canada later. So, Donald Trump once again presented to the world as the ruler. He is the king of the world. We saw it in Europe, in France, for the reopening of the Notre Dame Cathedral. And then we saw it this weekend at Pope Francis's funeral. And then we have this today from The Atlantic. And, you know, they just did a big interview with Donald Trump. It just came out in the minutes before they say publishing tomorrow in this tweet, by the way. But I think the interview is out. I have not had a chance to read it. But their tweet says, Donald Trump told Ashley Parker and Michael Scherer that his second term feels different from his first. The first time I had two things to do, run the country and survive. I had all these crooked guys, he said. The second time, I run the country and the world. And this is the cover of The Atlantic. I run the country and the world. Donald Trump explains his victory and his plan. So the outlet at which Jeffrey Goldberg is the editor, the man responsible for the Suckers and Losers hoax, and the man responsible for the whole Signalgate story, involving Pete Hegseth of a month or so ago, and it's kind of ongoing. There's a new Hegseth thing every week, and I'll probably never get to ever talking about him because I don't find that story to be particularly relevant beyond the top line, except in a way I also might describe later. If only we can get there. There's just so much. There's just so much. Now, as you might imagine, Donald Trump saying that he runs the world is the sort of thing that's going to upset regime-oriented communists. And here we are with a CNN reaction. This is a man named Mark Preston, a guest on the show of Wolf Blitzer. And I'm going to speed this up just a little bit because we don't need to hear the full duration of these videos.
Right now, Mark, what are the big takeaways from this Atlantic article? Well, first of all, the fact that he did the interview with The Atlantic, as our viewers recall, The Atlantic was the news organization that broke the Signalgate story that really called into question how sensitive information was being used and processed with Pete Hegseth and, of course, others in the administration. But what I found interesting was The Atlantic asked, how does a second term compare to your first term? And this is what Donald Trump says, because I think it says a lot about Donald Trump. The first time I had two things to do, run the country and survive. I had all these crooked guys. And the second time, I run the country and the world. And I don't think that there's too many people that could argue that Donald Trump right now is not running the world. We have seen world leaders kowtow to him even before he was sworn in as president. We saw world leaders showing up in Mar-a-Lago to try to get on his good side. So Donald Trump seems to be having some fun, but they've had 4 years, Wolf, 4 years to prepare to try to take over this federal government. And they were prepared to take over this federal government. Very, very long article. Donald Trump is enjoying this. That's the title of the article.
Donald Trump is enjoying this. Imagine how much it must hurt to be a CNN viewer at home and see someone talking about Donald Trump claiming to be the leader of the world. And that man tells you, well, yeah, it's pretty hard to deny that he is leading the world. I mean, all these world leaders were showing up at his house just to spend time with him, even though he totally wasn't president. Is he the king of the world? What would it mean to be king of the world? I don't know. And I don't know how to feel about that. I'm just saying all the optics suggest that's the case. And now Trump's saying it. They hate him more than anything. And they hate his supporters more than anything. They've gone after him and they've gone after the supporters. And they've convinced a whole lot of Americans, sadly, to hate Trump and to hate his supporters, because of the threat that Trump poses to them and their control system. But now he's king. So what will that mean? I don't know. And I don't want to make today's episode about pondering that. And maybe we'll come back to that at some point down the road. But it's certainly a departure from the one world, liberal, international, rules-based order and the top-down, centralized system of control. And we're going to come back to that too. But I want to talk about a little more optics in the presentation of all of this. You might have heard John and I mention on Devolution Power Hour on Saturday a football player named Shedeur Sanders. He's the son of former NFL great Deion Sanders. And Deion coached him last year at Colorado, University of Colorado. Now, Shedeur Sanders is one of the most hyped draft prospects of all time. Media blitz in every aspect. Initially, they had him going in the top 3 picks. And as the draft progressed Thursday, Friday, he didn't get selected. First round, second round, third round went by. No selection. Saturday, he finally was drafted in the middle of the 5th round by the Cleveland Browns, the second quarterback they had chosen in the draft. He's not going to be the starter for the Cleveland Browns. That's very unlikely. His NFL future is doubtful at best, though people still think he's really talented. Some people, or at least they say that. He slid to the 5th round from the top of the 1st round. The 5th round is college football players no one's really familiar with, and they very seldom make a major impact in the NFL. It's like no man's land once you're on day 3 of the draft. And so the media did everything they could to push Shedeur Sanders. He was going to go to this team. He was going to go to this team. All the predictions in the first round. And then surely after the first round, he's going to go in the second. He's going to go in the third. ESPN's expert, Mel Kiper, built up this huge effort. And I think it was an effort to get Shedeur Sanders drafted by hyping him up and hyping him up. Maybe they wanted the story. Maybe they wanted the constant press about Shedeur Sanders because he's one of those guys that's going to capture attention anywhere he goes. He did terribly in his pre-draft interviews because he didn't care. He's super cocky, self-obsessed, all these things. So Donald Trump had an interesting post on Friday afternoon. This was before the second round. So he had already slipped out of the first round. This is the second round. Or this is before the second round, sorry. What is wrong with NFL owners? Are they stupid? Deion Sanders was a great college football player and was even greater in the NFL. He's also a very good coach, streetwise and smart. Therefore, Shedeur, his quarterback son, has phenomenal genes and is all set for greatness. He should be, quote unquote, picked immediately by a team that wants to win. Good luck, Shedeur, and say hello to your wonderful father. But Shedeur was not picked for the rest of that day. He made it all the way into the fifth round. Now, I think this is interesting because Donald Trump is highlighting this player. Now, was Donald Trump just a Shedeur Sanders fan and a Deion Sanders fan? Maybe. Does Donald Trump pay a lot of attention to college football? Doesn't seem to. When he has athletes at the White House, he's very friendly with all of them and very supportive of what they're doing. And he's had involvement with the NFL and the USFL over the last 4 decades, from back at the time of the Art of the Deal. But that doesn't seem to be enough to warrant Truth Social post. Maybe. So what was going on? Did the NFL want Donald Trump to put some emphasis, some steam behind Shedeur Sanders? Maybe. Did Deion call? Maybe. I don't know. But he made the statement and he shined a spotlight on the NFL draft for a lot of people who aren't terribly interested in the NFL draft. And I imagine that many of you aren't terribly interested in the NFL draft. I'm also not terribly interested in the NFL draft, but I still think this is interesting. And it's not just because Trump mentioned it. It's because the media tried to create a reality where Shedeur Sanders was a superstar. He was the future of the NFL. At Colorado, they retired his jersey within the last 4 or 5 months. They're like, oh, yeah, this is such a superstar. We need to immediately retire his jersey. By the way, one of his teammates, I think it's one of his teammates, went second pick overall. This guy, Travis Hunter. Now I just have to check myself. I'm almost positive he's from Colorado. Asking the machine. Yes. Okay. Thought I was really messing something up there. They tried to make a reality happen and it failed. And Trump pointed it out. And I think that that is just an amazing example of the impact the media used to have compared to the impact they have now. They're accustomed to being able to create realities. And the pressure could be put on from the fans to the organization. The pressure could be put on the organization to select a quarterback, knowing that this good one is out there, makes them look stupid if they don't do it, and then he becomes a star later. There's all of these different aspects of, you know, these NFL dynamics at play. But the level of hype, Mel Kiper, their expert, lost his mind that Shedeur Sanders hadn't been taken in the first round. He couldn't believe what these teams were doing. And then he just kept sliding and sliding and sliding. So the great expert, the guy that's been the go-to for the NFL draft for, gosh, my entire adult life, 25 years, totally wrong, not even close to being right, looks ridiculous, lost his mind on television. It's just not going very well for these people. Donald Trump actually had while we're on the topic of the NFL, and then we'll move on. Donald Trump had an interesting post just an hour or so ago on Truth Social. He said, I am thrilled to announce that the Washington football team, and football team in capital letters, will be returning to our nation's capital. The new stadium deal is a huge win for Washington, D.C., and for the team's incredible fan base. It will also boost economic development, create more jobs, and hopefully lead to less crime in the area. We are making Washington, D.C. great again, one step at a time. Now, the Washington football team has been known for a few years as the Commanders. We were told that Redskins was racist and that Native Americans didn't like the name Redskins. They also don't like the name Cleveland Indians. So the Redskins were changed to the Commanders, and the Cleveland Indians were changed to the Guardians, which is what members of the Space Force are called. Just probably coincidence, you know. And I actually am just kidding. People always try to imply that there's some extra meaning by saying, oh, it's probably a coincidence. Is that a coincidence? While also protecting whether or not it's a coincidence. I don't believe it's a coincidence at all. Okay. I don't believe either of those names are coincidental. But before the name Commanders was selected, they were just called the Washington football team with the capital letters, just like that. And so I wonder, and this is something that a guy named Andrew in my Telegram chat pointed out, I think very astutely, a good insight. I wonder if he is winding back through these names. It's going to be the Washington football team, and then it'll be the Redskins. It would be hilarious to see them return to being the Redskins and for Cleveland to return to being the Indians. And I imagine both fan bases would probably be appreciative of that as well. But the beautification project of Washington, D.C. is marching forward. Now, that's not the only thing. I was actually going to save this for later, but we might as well bring it up right now. New York Post from yesterday. Federal Reserve blows $2.5 billion on Palace of Versailles headquarters despite mounting losses. Congress must put its foot down. Oh, yeah, the Congress is going to punish the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is pushing ahead with an eye-watering $2.5 billion revamp of its Washington, D.C. headquarters despite mounting losses, as one ex-official accused central bankers of behaving like French royalty. The lavish project, first rubber-stamped by government pen pushers in 2021, is now effectively being subsidized by American taxpayers because the Fed has not made a profit since 2022. The Federal Reserve building is building the Palace of Versailles on the National Mall, said Andrew Levin, professor of economics at Dartmouth, referring to the long-deposed French monarchy's official residence just outside Paris. Wow. So the French monarchy, while Donald Trump is being presented as king of the world, while he says he runs the world, the French monarchy's official residence just outside Paris, but they were deposed in the French Revolution. And the Federal Reserve has a Palace of Versailles. Is the Federal Reserve about to be deposed? Maybe. Congress must put its foot down and take a closer look at this to determine what authority the Fed has to spend this on its buildings. Levin, who served with the Fed's board from 1992 to 2012, added. A Federal Reserve spokesperson declined to comment. Costs have ballooned by nearly 32% from a 2019 estimate of $1.9 billion to complete, with all the work set to be finished in 2027. I was in Washington, D.C. for CPAC in 2023 and saw the Federal Reserve building closed down for construction, very clearly vacant. And it did not look anything like that. I don't know if that's an artist rendering. I don't know what the Federal Reserve looks like right now. I suppose it's possible that I may have been able to find that by using the machine effectively. And if one of you would like to do that and put it in the chat, I'm more than happy to pull that up. But it looked nothing like that. I wonder what it is going to ultimately be. $2.5 billion to build a building is preposterous. I mean, they build entire NFL stadium complexes for that. At least they used to. Who knows about right now? But yeah, I don't know who's going to live there when it's finally done in 2027. Is it going to be the Federal Reserve? I'm skeptical on that one. But let's move forward. Now, Donald Trump tomorrow is going to be marking the conclusion of his first 100 days with a rally in Michigan. The statement from the White House last week was, President Trump is excited to return to the great state of Michigan next Tuesday, where he will rally in Macomb County to celebrate the first 100 days. That from Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. So Donald Trump rallies are always optics-oriented events to show the country how much support there is for Trump's agenda. And I don't know what the rally plans are, but I would suspect that whatever space they choose is going to be filled to capacity with an enormous crowd. If they choose a large outdoor venue, we might see 50,000 plus people there, as we have so many times in the past. And now he's president, and people are loving him. And people who hated him when this whole thing started are loving him. Some of us have been that way for, 5+ years now. But there are people who are coming to terms with this situation just since November. We know that the place is going to be packed. Every time Donald Trump goes somewhere, everyone at the venue is honoring Trump, whether it's a UFC fight or the Cathedral of Notre Dame or the Pope's funeral or wherever. People are there to see Trump and to, I was going to say praise. That might be a little bit overboard, but I mean, praise not in the religious sense, just give him their praise, give him their approval, show him their support. And I think that we're going to see that again tomorrow. And that's especially important because the entire media wave of this week is to show that Donald Trump has had the worst 100 days ever to start an administration. And they're trying to convince the country that's true. And I wonder if this event was scheduled and known about prior to Trump scheduling his, I would suspect that they did. Prior to Trump scheduling his rally, this is from The Hill today. Harris to criticize Trump in first major address since leaving office. Former Vice President Kamala Harris will jab at President Trump in the keynote address at the Emerge Gala on Wednesday, making her first public remarks since leaving office in January, the source told The Hill. In her remarks, the former vice president, who lost to Trump in November, is expected to offer pointed criticism of the administration, the source said. Harris is also expected to honor the organization for its role empowering women in politics and issue a call to action to combat Trump's economic policies and his push to overhaul the federal government. They also note that she signed with CAA. They describe this as an entertainment firm. It's an entertainment agency. They get their clients jobs in the entertainment industry and in media. And then they essentially tell those clients what to do. They also note that speculation has swirled surrounding whether Harris is mulling a run for California governor in 2026, and she is expected to make a formal decision by the end of the summer. And apparently they have fake news polls that suggest Kamala is in the catbird seat to become the next California governor, replacing our boy New. That would be hilarious. So Kamala Harris is being tasked with critiquing Donald Trump's first 100 days in office. Kamala Harris gave the same speech at every event throughout the fake campaign of 2024, and it was about 16 minutes long. Is she going to give that same speech again? Probably. She's going to call Trump racist. She's going to say that he's destroying the economy, blah, 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 blah. Just amplifying media narratives. The narrative is going to come through the media. The narrative is going to come through this mouthpiece. The narrative is going to come through this mouthpiece. And it's going to be Kamala Harris tomorrow. It was Joe Biden just 2 weeks ago, or whenever that was. I think it was like 2 weeks ago, right? We did a clip or two from that, or 4. I think there were 4. Doesn't matter. So as for the media side of things, this is how it is being presented. And this is just a simple internet search. Trump worst approval ever in 100 days. Donald Trump approval rating over 100 days, the lowest of any president in 80 years. Trump's approval ratings fall as he nears 100 days in office, polls show. CNN, Trump's approval at 100 days lower than any president in at least 7 decades. Not 8. Trump's 100-day approval rating at historic low compared to predecessors. He has broken his own record for being the worst, is the quote they show. Trump has lowest 100-day approval rating. Trump's poll numbers are historically awful. Amazing, isn't it? Donald Trump, apparently, according to polls, is doing the worst job that anyone in anyone's lifetime has ever done. Not since World War II has anyone seen this kind of disapproval this early in their term. How could it be? He did it in 2017 and he's doing it again in 2025. Wow. Wow, wow, wow.
Wow. Wowie, wow, wow, wow.
Wow. Here is former Trump spokesperson. Actually, I'll pull this up. Let's do the Newt tweet. Then we'll do former Trump spokesperson Liz Harrington. John McLaughlin points out that the New York Times and ABC Washington Post polls about real Donald Trump approval are fake polls from fake news. The New York Times has only 37% Trump 2024 voters, and the ABC Washington Post had only 34% Trump voters. Trump, I think that should be got, but he wrote gout. Trump got 50% of the vote, so add 13 and 16 points to his rating, and it's pretty darned good. And that would be correct. Liz Harrington says propaganda laying the groundwork to sell the lie that the dying party that shills for illegal gang members and criminals is going to have a blue wave in the midterms. And of course, this is all a narrative seeding project to halt Trump's agenda and then to make the case that they are capable, the Democrats are, of winning fake elections. Anyone who believes that the Democrats are capable of winning a real election right now needs their head examined. But of course, we don't have real elections. Donald Trump himself responded to the polling today. And by the way, all of Con Inc. media is discussing this story today. And they are all calling it a polling psyop. It seems pretty clear that that is a coordinated messaging effort. And you would have to suspect that it's downstream from Turning Point USA or the Daily Weimar or potentially, Murdoch, Fox News, but probably the Charlie Kirk element, as most of that kind of messaging is. But they are noting this polling is a psychological operation. And Of course it is. And so it's good that the normies, to the extent that they A, exist, and B, matter. I mean, certainly they exist, but the idea that they're taking all this information in and formerly rejecting it, but now accepting it, I don't know. I don't think that's how it works. But Trump says, great pollster John McLaughlin, one of the most highly respected in the industry, has just stated that the failing New York Times poll and the ABC Washington Post poll about a person named Donald J. Trump, me, are fake polls from fake news organizations. The New York Times poll has only 37% Trump 2024 voters, and the ABC Washington Post poll has only 34% Trump voters. Unheard of numbers unless looking for a negative result, which they are. These people should be investigated for election fraud, and add in the Fox News pollster while you're at it. They are negative criminals who apologize to their subscribers and readers after I win elections big, much bigger than their polls showed I would win. Lose, and he says loose, so that's a misspelling with an extra O. Lose a lot of credibility and then go on cheating and lying for the next cycle, only worse. They suffer from Trump derangement syndrome, and there is nothing that anyone or anything can do about it. They are sick. Almost only write negative stories about me, no matter how well I am doing. 99% at the border, best number ever. And are truly the enemy of the people. I wish them well, but will continue to fight to make America great again. That's pretty interesting, especially when he's talking about having them investigated for election fraud. That kind of harkens back to what we were discussing on Friday with the whole Act Blue thing, and how the connection to foreign donors immediately makes that part of the whole in the election fraud narrative, but also connects directly to Executive Order 13848 about foreign interference in American elections. Now, this, I'm not suggesting connects to that piece of it, but for fake news polling to be considered part and parcel to election fraud, that's an advance in the framing of this story and the framing of election fraud. And that does bring us one step closer to encompassing the entire propaganda media apparatus as complicit in election fraud. And of course they are. And of course, they're also complicit in that propaganda and in that election fraud with foreign actors. So you can bring it back around in that way. They incorporate foreign fact checks, foreign funding, foreign news organizations and intelligence organizations, all feeding into that same system. And we've covered the global propaganda media at great length over the years on this podcast. So we don't need to delve back into that at this time. So he's talking about how they are simply lying and distorting the public perception about what's happening. And they're doing it for political advantage. They're doing it to hold on to power when it's pretty obvious that people can see their grip on power slipping away. Scott Bessent, in an interview the other day, or I guess it was yesterday on This Week with, is George Stephanopoulos still hosting that? I hear he's got some legal concerns vis-a-vis Donald Trump. But Scott Bessent said something along similar lines.
When I look at some of the things that are being published, there was a story 10 days ago that said, this is the worst April for the stock market since the Great Depression. 10 days later, the NASDAQ is now up on the month of April. And I haven't seen a story that says, oh, stock market has biggest bounce back ever. So I think
it certainly has gone back and forth.
I think a lot of this is media driven. When I look at
is it the best stock market or is it the worst stock market? Can't be both. Apparently it can, because we're living in dueling realities right now. We are corresponding with two different rule sets. They are presenting their view of reality, and it is being rejected because it's detached from the reality that people can perceive naturally based on their connection with reality prime. The false reality is collapsing. Again, the Shedeur Sanders example, that's an attempt at false reality construction that failed. Similarly, these polling numbers are false reality construction, and they might work for some people. If you go on the pages of liberals on X, formerly Twitter, or I'm sure if you go on Blue Sky or any of these, maybe Facebook still, people think that Trump really has done the worst job out of any president for 100 years, and that the American people agree based on these polls. Why in the world would they only poll 34 or 37%? Why would their sample only include such a small portion of Trump voters? It doesn't make any sense. The critique by McLaughlin and reiterated by Newt and Liz Harrington and Donald Trump is exactly right. Why isn't it 50%? If it was 50%, these approval numbers would be over 50%. Now, elections are fake. Donald Trump's majority is much, much larger than 50%. It was in the November 2024 election. Certainly is now. And the approval has increased since then. So these numbers are totally irrelevant. It's entirely fake. And it's important to understand that. Let those liberals say these sorts of things and laugh in their faces. It's not even worth proving them wrong. Just laugh at them. I've been saying that for years. I wish that people would just take that approach and not spend their time arguing with these people. But the problem is that the argument becomes part of our identity. I want to prove them all wrong. I've done it myself in the past. I try not to do it too much now. Lance 2002 in the chat, $5. Great analysis once again, Chris. Thank you for the Rumble rant, Lance. Let's keep marching along. Over the weekend, we had the White House Correspondents Association dinner, and they give themselves, the DC Press Corps gives one another awards as though it's like the Directors Guild Awards. I was going to say the Oscars or the Grammys or something, but these people, most of them are not the stars. They're kind of in the background a little bit. They're more, many of them are more crew than cast members, although, of course, the television media there is there as well, and they would be more like the actors. But in terms of the print journalists, they're like the Writers Guild. That maybe that would have been a better comparison. But they give each other awards, and they have a comedian, and the comedian tells, I mean, I was going to say jokes, but are they funny at all? No, because they're totally detached from reality, because they're not able to present a reality-based routine and make it funny. They can't present reality. Without being able to present reality, it's awfully hard to be funny unless you are just saying sort of shocking things to a crowd that wants to be shocked, or very agreeable things in a joke format to a crowd that agrees with you. Of course, that's what this is. It's all internal. It's the same reason why the meme warfare from the regime always fails, because everybody actually knows that they're lying the whole time. But this is Kristen Welker, the woman who has been the moderator of debates and has interviewed President Trump a number of times. Total liberal, as they all are. And she is about to bring up the honored guest of the evening.
The Aldo Beckman Award for Overall Excellence is named for a past president of the association, the late Chicago Tribune Washington correspondent, Aldo Beckman. The award was established in 1981 to recognize a correspondent who personifies the journalistic excellence and personal qualities of Aldo Beckman: impartiality, integrity, and a deep knowledge of the presidency. The award also includes a prize of $2,500. This year's award goes to Alex Thompson of Axios. The judges said Thompson's aggressive reporting on President Biden, especially leading up to and after the Trump-Biden debate, revealed the president's cognitive decline was impacting his ability to do his job, information the White House tried to conceal. Ladies and gentlemen, the White House Correspondents Association is pleased to give the Aldo Beckman Award to Alex Thompson.
Now, before we listen to Alex Thompson, consider what she just told you he's being awarded for. Excellence in journalism for uncovering that Biden was old and not quite all there. Maybe there were some mental problems. Maybe his capacities weren't what we were told they were by the administration and by everyone in that room. But since they finally admitted it, got to give him an award. I mean, he deserved it, right? He figured out that Joe Biden wasn't all there mentally in 2024. Like 9 months ago. How did he figure it out so early? We were talking about that in 2020. It was obvious and on display for the American public in 2020 if you watched anything Joe Biden did. And in fact, maybe we should just take a second and watch one of my favorite Joe Biden highlights from 2020. Oh, man. Come on, man. I am always upset when there's not a very it's always a pain when the only YouTube videos are long ones and I'm going to have to search for them. But here's one of my favorite Joe Biden moments.
It's a long way until November. We got more questions.
You got more questions, but I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, and you ain't black.
You ain't black. They couldn't figure it out then. Sure, it was during the summer of love, while Biden supporters were burning down our cities. But they couldn't figure out that Joe Biden wasn't quite all the way there, telling Charlemagne the God that if you don't know whether you're voting for him or Trump, you ain't black. Mysterious stuff. Let's hear from Alex Thompson himself, this awarded journalist. Ah, pictures. What's she doing with her hand? Hold on, we just got to go look at this. What is Kristen Welker doing with her hand? Are they supposed to be holding the award together?
Indulge me because I have a lot of thank yous. Thank you first to my mom, to my dad,
all right,
to Axios for hiring me, investing, and believing in the importance of trustworthy journalism. Thank you to Asia Whitaker Moore. Thank you to my reporting.
Are we done with the
thank you to Jonathan Swan, to Bradley Singer, and Debbie and Mike Tackett. It's my speech, so a nakedly shameless plug that original. And thank you most of all to my sources for trusting me. One serious note.
Imagine needing sources to figure out that Joe Biden's old and not quite there. Wow.
To my bones, I believe that reporting and the White House Correspondents Association is as necessary as ever. President Biden's decline and its cover-up by the people around him is a reminder that every White House, regardless of party, is capable of deception. But being truth tellers also means telling the truth about ourselves. We, myself included, missed a lot of this story, and some people trust us less because of it. We bear some responsibility for faith in the media being at such lows.
we bear some responsibility for faith in the media being at such lows. He just said he missed the story that he's now being awarded for. He missed it for a long time. Couldn't believe the administration would lie to him. Isn't it amazing that no matter who we're talking about at any given point, when they have to admit that they actually did a terrible job, it's never that they were doing it intentionally. It's that someone else just did their job badly and we didn't note it, or we didn't notice it, or we didn't want to say something about it because, we don't, those people are they're on our side. We don't want to make them look bad. Then we can't trust them anymore. What are we going to do? Say, oh, you can't trust Democrat administrations anymore? No. Oh, we missed the story, but we were misled. It's very sad. I can't believe they were misled. It's like when Ben Shapiro trusted the experts, and that's why he told all of his hundreds of thousands or millions of listeners to get the vaccine, dopes. Plus, his wife's a doctor. And I don't know if you remember this, but when he was giving his mea culpa on telling people to get vaccinated, he said that it's part of his Jewish upbringing to trust the elders and trust the experts. So you just always defer to the controllers of the system and you do what they say. Interesting moral code for Ben Shapiro. Let us continue with Alex Thompson.
I say this because acknowledging errors builds trust, and being defensive about them further erodes it. We should have done better. I believe our mission is vital in a world where people are struggling to figure out what's true, and people with power are not telling the truth. I also believe that this is
By the way, that's now Donald Trump. Joe Biden and his people, they didn't tell the truth about Joe Biden's age and potential dementia. And thank goodness we figured it out in time. But we still have very powerful liars, according to Alex Thompson, and they're not in the media, and they're not in the Uniparty. They're not members of the regime. They're members of Donald Trump's administration and Trump himself. Of course, we still have liars.
Association has been, is, and will continue to be critical to that mission.
No.
Thank you to the association's leadership for your unflinching defense of the First Amendment, not just now, but always. Your decades of daily battles on behalf of reporters is why this award is one of the great honors of my life.
All right. Enjoy your $2,500. That's really something else. They protect the First Amendment. Really? They all participated in a centralized fact-checking organization so that they could be telling the same story. And as they did that, the fact checks and the stories that they would tell would become the basis for marking mis, dis, and malinformation and using that to censor the American people. That's how much the media stood up for free speech. Not at all. What is he talking about? Now, I went through an article. I believe it was from Niall Ferguson, the British historian who's married to Ayaan Hirsi Ali. They are very closely connected to the info op formerly known as the intellectual dark web, which is now just still most of Joe Rogan's podcast guest roster. And we're going to talk about some of that later. And Bari Weiss and her free press thing. But Niall Ferguson wrote this article basically suggesting that the elites need to take some responsibility for what's happened in the world and understand why people are rejecting their agenda and the program they want to push. And this is common. This is part of the playbook. Mess everything up in terrible, terrible ways. Lie about it the entire time, cover it up with propaganda and nonsense and bullshit, censor people, distract them with even more ridiculous nonsense, feed them television, everything. Just make it long enough that the system can be put in place. Once people have decided that they completely hate the system, tell them you understand they're upset. And while you've taken the system to 10, you're going to ratchet it down. We talked about the progressive ratchet last week. They're going to ratchet it down to a 9 or an 8 and then expect you to thank them for easing your suffering that they were inflicting while lying about. And we saw this, of course, with the COVID stuff. And we saw it last year with how the Uniparty right responded finally to immigration. We've seen it with the war efforts. All these people who were supportive of the war efforts for months or years coming around later and then acting like they were against it the whole time. And it's gone on too long. That's the sort of thing they say. We shouldn't keep funding the war effort in Ukraine. You can remember J.D. Vance taking that position, as well as many members of the Uniparty right in government. It was just about the funding. They were just being fiscal conservatives, which allowed them to get away with it. Putin is still very bad. But that's the strategy. Tell the public, we get it. We messed up. We did something wrong. It wasn't our fault, but it didn't turn out the way we had intended. And we understand why you're upset about it. And what we're going to do is tell you that we're not going to continue doing the thing that's upsetting you to the same degree. And we're going to do that so that you'll trust us again, right? We hear them talking about restoring trust in the medical community. We hear them talking about restoring trust in our elections. What's important is not that our elections are legitimate. It's that people will have their faith in elections restored. That's what we always hear about these election integrity efforts. You know, we just can't have the situation where people don't trust their elections. So we need to do some things to make it so that the people can trust their elections again. Well, are you going to fix the elections? No, we're not going to do that. But we are going to do some things to convince people to trust the elections again. And some of the things we're going to do are tell you that people with little R's next to their name won rather than people with little D's next to their name. Hence, Glenn Youngkin. Just saying. So they take responsibility. I take responsibility. Remember the celebrity video after the Summer of Love, George Floyd? Oh man, we should just watch just a minute of it because it's so this thing. They actually become good for taking responsibility. And in this case, it's ridiculous. I mean, what did they do?
Responsibility.
I take responsibility.
I take
so embarrassing
responsibility. I take responsibility for every unchecked moment,
for every time it was easier to ignore than to call it out for what it was.
Every not so funny joke.
Poor Justin Theroux. They are actors reading lines in front of them and acting in a commercial about racism, taking responsibility. Once they take responsibility, if you don't forgive them, now it's your responsibility. You're the bad guy. They were the bad guy. I mean, they weren't the bad guy. They just, made a mistake. But now that they've taken responsibility for making the mistake, if you don't immediately forgive them and give them all your love and trust again, well, then it's your fault. You're the bad person. How could you be like that? It is amazing to me. But let's move forward. This article dropped last night, and it's a long article, so we're not going to go all the way through it. But I want to go through a little bit of this, especially in light of, as I said at the beginning, the title of today's episode, The Ruler. And I thought about maybe calling it The Rulers, Either one works. So use it both ways in your mind, whichever way makes you happier. And if you want to vote in the chat, it's not a real election. I'll still decide to do whatever I want, but you might influence me to call it one or the other. And that's as much as I can offer. This is Semafor from last night. Ben Smith. Ben Smith used to be at the New York Times. And I believe that he was the one who wrote the article about how objective journalism should not be pursued, that they have a much bigger cause and they need to do their journalism framed under an understanding of various forms of social justice. That was part of the fallout during the Summer of Love and the New York Times editorial board and all of that. But now he has a new news organization. It's called Semafor. And the headline is "The Group Chats That Changed America." And right there, you have Marc Andreesen. That there is Mark Cuban. And we'll see who else. We'll see who some of these other characters are as we go along. Last Thursday morning, a bit before 10 a.m. in Austin and nearly 11 p.m. in Singapore, Joe Lonsdale had enough of Balaji Srinivasan's views on China. This is insane CCP thinking. Lonsdale, a co-founder of Palantir, wrote to a 300-member Signal group. Not sure what leaders hang out with you in Singapore, but on this, you have been taken over by a crazy China mind virus. Now, Joe Lonsdale is someone we've discussed before. So co-founder of Palantir, he's one of those tech billionaires, always getting retweets from Elon Musk. He was Trump supportive last year, but only because Trump was the only option that wasn't Joe Biden and then Kamala. Before that, he was a supporter of Ron DeSantis. He has been never Trump or anti-Trump at various points, but he is, on the Uniparty right side of the globalist, technocratic Zionist movement. And he is all of those things. So he's upset at Balaji Srinivasan. Now, Balaji Srinivasan is also a big Twitter person, a technologist, as they'll describe him here, a former Coinbase chief technology officer and influential tech figure who now lives in the city-state, that being Singapore, responded that China executed extremely well over 45 years. Any analysis that doesn't take that into account makes it seem like the U.S. could have held it back. Okay. But back to Srinivasan. In 2020, he was a proponent of, what did they call them back then? Safety zones. He was a fan of contact tracing, and he wanted green, yellow, and red zones to show the public where not to go at any given moment based on the prevalence of COVID in those locations. And people think this guy is a genius. That's either A, moronic, or B, evil. It can't be anything else other than that. And in 2020, maybe those ideas seemed a little more sensible and a little more plausible because, if you believe that the pandemic was real, then of course you wanted to avoid getting the pandemic and you wanted to avoid getting other people sick. And so you were like, well, contact tracing, that would make sense. If someone has it, not to go over there. This is the technological system of control that could, when all the parts are put together, eradicate human liberty. And it's important to understand that. And it's important to understand that that's who this man Balaji is. And also, Singapore, some people love the society and that's just fine, but it's very much a place that's of the vision of the sovereign individual, of the vision of a Curtis Yarvin, as we've talked about many times. But let's continue. It was a normal, robust disagreement among friends in a friendly space, as both raced to X to declare after I emailed them about it. And it was just another day in Chatham House, a giant and raucous signal group that forms part of the sprawling network of influential private chats that began during the fervid early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, and which have fueled a new alliance of tech and the U.S. right. The same week in Chatham House, Lonsdale and the Democrat billionaire Mark Cuban sparred over affirmative action, and Cuban and Daily Wire founder Ben Shapiro discussed questions of culture and work ethic. So that's quite a signal chat already. And remember, we've heard about Signalgate, the Jeffrey Goldberg story. Is there a relation? I mean, ops are ops. They interconnect. The idea is to seed stories so that other stories don't work. Who knows? We're going to find out over time as this signal thing evolves. If there's nothing else from the initial Signalgate Pete Hegseth story to take away, it's certainly that Signal and these sorts of chats, that this one was compromised by the actions of a person, adding a reporter to that Signal chat. That's how the story goes. But you begin, and some of the Signal conversation with Pete Hegseth last week, by the way, involved the idea that he was having software, Signal software, put on computers and having internet alterations made at the DOD so that he could use Signal. There's some people say Signal is very safe. Some people say it's not safe, but this is very interesting. So that aside, Chatham House is the name of a globalist think tank. There's also the Chatham House rules, which mean that whatever's discussed cannot be discussed outside of that. Like, it's all privileged information within that enclosed unit. And there's 300 people in this chat. And among them, Joe Lonsdale, Balaji Srinivasan, and we'll keep a running tally as we go. I'm not going to repeat it every time, but just think in your mind about all the people involved in this. And now we have Mark Cuban and Ben Shapiro. This constellation of rolling elite political conversations revolved primarily around the venture capitalist Marc Andreesen and a circle of Silicon Valley figures. None of their participants was surprised to see Trump administration officials firing off secrets and emails on the platform last month. I did not have the good fortune to be accidentally added to one of the chats, which can be set to make messages disappear after just 30 seconds. But their influence flows through X, Substack, and podcasts, and constitutes a kind of dark matter of American politics and media. The group chats aren't always primarily a political space, but they are the single most important place in which a stunning realignment toward Donald Trump was shaped and negotiated, and an alliance between Silicon Valley and the new right formed. The group chats are, quote, the mimetic upstream of mainstream opinion, wrote one of their key organizers, Sriram Krishnan, a former partner in the venture capital firm Andreessen Horowitz, typically styled A16Z, who is now the White House senior policy advisor for AI. Okay. Andreessen Horowitz, that's Marc Andreesen. So we have two others to add to our roster. Now we are at 6. And these people discuss politics and media and probably coordinate on strategies. And they all decided to be supportive enough of Donald Trump in the fake election of 2024. And then the tech industry, and Shapiro and Charlie Kirk and others were given credit and took credit from the mainstream media and from these sorts of sources for winning the 2024 election for Donald Trump. He couldn't have done it alone. He needed them to do it. That's how it happened. These people got together and decided to make Donald Trump president. Of course, these are hardly the only power group chats. Anti-Trump liberals are now coordinating their responses on Signal. There are group chats for Black political elites and morning show producers. A vast and influential parallel set of tech conversations takes place on WhatsApp. There's a big China-friendly group over on WeChat. Elite podcasters have one. Okay, so there's group chats. Wow. We're going to focus on this group chat in particular. I have a group chat. I have multiple group chats, and they're very, very helpful because everybody can know what everybody else is thinking and people can give their feedback. It's good for group decision making in the environment where a group makes decisions. It's the same thing happening on both sides, and I've been amazed at how much this is coordinating our reality, said the writer Thomas Chatterton Williams, who was for a time a member of the group chat with Andreesen. So another one of our intellectual elites, and he was intellectual dark web adjacent back up till 2020 and maybe beyond. I don't know. I stopped listening to any of that stuff. He was a COVID superfan. He thought the science, trusting the science and trusting the experts was exactly the way to go. And he was all about COVID. He also lives in France, by the way. If you weren't in the business at all, you'd think everyone was arriving at conclusions independently, and they're not. It's a small group of people who talk to each other and overlap between politics and journalism and a few industries. Wow. But there is no equivalent to the intellectual counterculture that grew up over the last 5 years on the tech right, and no figure remotely like Andreesen, the towering, enthusiastic 53-year-old who co-founded A16Z and before that invented the modern web browser. Okay. He also funds Barry Weiss's propaganda project called the Free Press. But let's continue. In February, he described the group chats to the podcaster Lex Fridman, who is one of the dumbest people on earth, as the equivalent of samizdat, the self-published Soviet underground press, in a quote-unquote soft authoritarian age of social media shaming and censorship. The combination of encryption and disappearing messages really unleashed it, he said. The chats, he wrote recently, helped produce our national vibe shift. So I hope you're beginning to understand this. I assume you are. As this group determining what other people are going to think. They're coordinating their efforts for their ascent to power and for their political ideology to become ascendant, using Donald Trump in this case as a vehicle. And before that, they used other vehicles. But now we're supposed to believe that they are aligned with Donald Trump because they have chosen to use Trump as the vehicle for their ascent to power. That's pretty crazy. The chats are occasionally marked by the sort of thing that would have gotten you scolded on Twitter in 2020 and which would pass as unremarked on X in 2025. So they're much edgier than they used to be. I'm sure that they're very, very unwoke and totally maybe racist. They have rarely been discussed in public, though you can catch the occasional mention in, for instance, a podcast debate between Cuban and the Republican entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy, which started in the chat. So Vivek's in there as well. Isn't it amazing how all these people are always expressing basically the same ideas in public? I mean, Vivek was very Trump friendly, but never authentically. Did anyone actually believe that Vivek Ramaswamy was legitimately MAGA? Are any of these people legitimately MAGA, regardless of whether or not they supported Donald Trump in 2024? Supporting Donald Trump in 2024 in a fake campaign leading up to a fake election against a fake Democrat candidate in Kamala Harris who won no primaries and was replacing a fake and illegitimate president. That's supposed to be like their get out of jail free card forever. Like, I'm always in MAGA. I supported Donald Trump in 2024. That is, that's like saying you're not racist because you have a black friend, if having a black friend wasn't actually proof that you're not racist. It is the way the left portrays that idea. The left. These people are the left, by the way. They're not the right. And that's what I was going to say. I thought I was going to forget something. The political spectrum And the misunderstanding of the political spectrum is so important in these conversations because it's what makes it impossible to see the controlled opposition dynamic, to see the controlled opposition for what it is and understand what's outside of that, and to understand that these people are almost exactly like their leftist counterparts on everything that actually matters. They'll speak differently about issues. They have some differences on social standards, but not enough to actually push back against the progressive ratchet, which is what makes it a ratchet. These are the conservatives, quote unquote, as described by Nick Land in that piece from Friday. But of course, these people believe that they're beyond that, as does the man we're about to see mentioned. But they're made visible through a group consensus on social media. And again, the formation of group consensus is the entire point of the coordinated influencer operations like the one run by Charlie Kirk, where they pay people to disseminate the same messaging. Because if everybody's saying that thing, well, that thing must be right. I identify with this group of people based on my politics and their purported politics. And therefore, if they're all saying this thing, people who share my beliefs and some who even I disagree with, they're all saying this thing. Well, that must be true. It's the formation, the illusion of consensus online. And so this is very clear that this group of 300 elites on a signal chat is projecting the image of consensus online. Their effects have ranged from the mainstreaming of the monarchist pundit Curtis Yarvin to a particularly focused and developed dislike of the former Washington Post writer Taylor Lorenz. So Taylor Lorenz was specifically bullied because of these people in this signal chat. And I'm not saying there's no connection there for the prominence of Taylor Lorenz as a particular focus. I think that's probably accurate. They probably did that successfully. Mainstreaming the monarchist pundit Curtis Yarvin. Now, Andreesen sounds, his ideas are totally fit with Yarvin, but Andreesen's also funding the media project of Barry Weiss, whose writers are predominantly, if not exclusively, on the left, all globalist, all Zionist, but that's Andreesen's project. But Andreesen is aligned with Yarvin. And Yarvin is supposed to be the ultra right-wing guy. He presents himself as an ultra right-wing guy. He describes himself that way. He says, I'll always be the person to the farthest right in any room I'm in. He said that in an interview that I watched not too long ago. I think it's from late last year or this year. And in that interview, he absolutely showed his full normie in his takes on COVID. Let me see if I can quickly find this link. Here it is. And it's funny, this link is called Welcome to the Dark Enlightenment. The Dark Enlightenment was a book-length essay, I guess in parts, or just a book, written by, maybe it's an essay within that book, and there are other parts, by Nick Land. And he and Yarvin are both kind of given credit for that idea, though their ideas are much different, as I've described before. But so we have Andreesen, who's on the left side of the tech libertarian movement, and Peter Thiel, who we're going to talk about in a bit, who's on the right side of that movement. And somehow they're both totally aligned with Curtis Yarvin in this signal chat that has actually mainstreamed Curtis Yarvin. How strange. And as you'll see in that interview, Curtis Yarvin is being interviewed by a leftist. And I'm not saying that she agrees with him necessarily, but it's not. She knows that he is not her enemy. And he's not, because he's not actually on the far right. And the far right is the lack of state. It's anarchy. It's decentralization. The far left is collectivism and state power and centralization. We are continually told that these people are on the right because they align with Republicans or they somehow have conservative values, but they are all ultimately statists. Now, Yarvin, to call him a statist would not be entirely accurate. He is very much a proponent of a powerful state or government, but only to the extent that you can leave and opt out at any point. Now, I don't know if that's a realistic idea in the first place, but let's leave that aside and move on. They succeeded at avoiding leaks until, to a modest extent, this article, in part because of Signal's and WhatsApp's disappearing message features, and in part because the groups had formed out of a mix of fear and disdain for journalists they believed were, quote unquote, out to get us, as one member put it. Many of the roughly 20 participants I spoke to also felt a genuine sentimental attachment to the spaces and believed in their value. One participant in the group described them as a republic of letters, a reference to the long distance intellectual correspondence of the 17th century. So they are the world's most important intellectuals dispersed around the world, able to come together to decide things that end up forming a public consensus via technology, via social media. And those ideas then end up predicting our future, creating our reality. Others often invoked European salon culture. The closed groups offered an alternative to the Twitter and Slack conversations once dominated by progressive social movements, when polarizing health debates swept through social media and society in the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. But somehow, the people in this group were all able to agree about COVID, about most of COVID. They knew it was a real thing. They knew something had to be done. And the answer is, get the vaccines, dopes. We can't make people wear masks, but it's good if they want to. Nope. Masks don't work, and it's bad if they do it. The controlled opposition agrees. Differences in brand to appeal to different people. The left, the more overtly authoritarian, but for public safety, just to protect everybody. They want everybody in masks. They want everybody hiding their faces. The right, quote unquote, doesn't want that. It's not that masks don't work and this is an evil social experiment that is going to necessarily have terrible consequences. It's not that. It's just that they're not allowed to force you to wear it. No one should be forced to wear the mask. That's controlled opposition. People during 2020 felt that there was a monoculture on social media, and if they didn't agree with something, group chats became a safe space to debate that, share that, build consensus, feel that you're not alone, said Eric Torenberg, an entrepreneur who was the first employee of the tech community hub Product Hunt. As Krishnan was setting up a set of tech group WhatsApp chats at A16Z, Torenberg independently founded, a group of text chat, now I can't read. I'm having one of those moments where I can't read. Let's try that again. Torenberg independently founded a group of tech chats on WhatsApp and some more political signal chats. They're having all the private conversations because they weren't allowed to have the public conversations, Andreesen told Torenberg on a recent podcast after joking in the name of secrecy that he'd never heard of such groups. If it wasn't for the censorship, all of these conversations would have happened in public, which would have been much better. That does not seem even remotely true. Their creations took off. It might not seem like it because of all the shit that people still post on X, but the internet has fragmented. The Substack author Noah Smith wrote, after my inquiries for this story spilled into public Saturday, group chats are now where everything important and interesting happens. Noah Smith is another guy who is often retweeted and interacted with by Elon Musk. And I'm just trying to scan through and see if there's anything else that I want to go through. This is such a long article, and I'm trying to remember from last night. Maybe we'll just point out some of these names that are in here. After a group of liberal intellectuals published a letter in Harper's on July 7th, 2020, some of its signers were invited to join a signal group called Everything is Fine. Their writers, including Camille Foster, Persuasion founder Yasha Mounk, this is Thomas Chatterton Williams, joined Andreesen and a group that also included the anti-woke conservative activist Chris Rufo. Chris Rufo was another DeSantis simp. Isn't it amazing? Ben Shapiro, DeSantis simp. Joe Lonsdale, DeSantis simp. Chris Rufo, DeSantis simp. Got to wonder how many others. Got to wonder how much this particular group had to do with pushing Ron DeSantis and the formation of the info op set up to push Ron DeSantis online, the DeSantis simp op. Just saying. Let me just take a brief pause here. We'll come back to that. I just want to get to the chat because I know I saw some Rumble rants go by. John in Connecticut says, a short read you might enjoy on the dual system of law at play in the USA. And the document is entitled, if it will load, The Intrinsic Provisions of the Dual System of Law Effectuated by the 14th Amendment. So I do have that saved, and I will go ahead and take a look at that because you know that's up my alley. And then Caramaga, $10. Thanks, Chris. APL. Wonderful. Okay, let's get back to this. The breaking point of this chat, by the way, came on July 5th, 2021, when Foster and Williams, along with the never Trump conservative David French and the liberal academic Jason Staley, wrote a New York Times op-ed criticizing new laws against teaching critical race theory. And of course, that's Rufo's big issue. They wanted to defeat the left. There's a whole segment on that. And they mention, by the way, Richard Hanania and Tucker Carlson. How about that? Here are some of the names of the chat at various points. Last Men, apparently. Oh, yeah. So manly, these guys. Matt Iglesias fan club, a joke about the Vox writer. James Burnham fan club, I'm not familiar with him. Biden 2024 re-elect committee, a joke, I suppose. Journalism deniers and Richard. Oh, so interesting, so funny. So Chatham House was launched in the summer of 2024. Chatham House includes high-profile figures like the economist Larry Summers, the historian Niall Ferguson, who we just talked about, and more partisan figures like Shapiro and the Democrat analyst David Shore. So within the same group chat, they're ultra-right, hardcore Republicans and conservatives like Ben Shapiro, and then people who are fans of the Democrat Party and they get along just fine. It's like there's a Uniparty and they're both pursuing the same goals or something. David Sachs is in there, and then they show this screenshot. David Sachs says this group has become worthless since the loudest voices have TDS. Eric Torenberg, you should create a new one with just smart people. And Sachs left. Brian Goldberg responded, I'm not sure we have TDS. I think we, Republicans who supported Trump, are seeing that this is a failed administration. Then Tucker Carlson left. Sean McGuire left. Tyler Winklevoss left. Now, maybe they left because Brian Goldberg was denying the Trump derangement, or maybe they left because of some other reason I can't say for sure. Let's jump down to the end. I do hope someone in those groups took some screenshots and a fuller story can be told. I was able to reconstruct fragments from participants who spoke to me because they consider the group chats an important open secret, and it's hard to deny their power. The political journalist Mark Halperin, who now runs Two-Way and has a show on Megyn Kelly's network, said it was remarkable that, quote, The left seems largely unaware that some of the smartest and most sophisticated Trump supporters in the nation from coast to coast are part of an overlapping set of text chains that allow their members to share links, intel, tactics, strategy, and ad hoc assignments. Also, clever and invigorating jokes. And they do this, not kidding, like 20 hours a day, including on weekends. He called their influence substantial. Many of the group chatters celebrate their success in driving the ascendant politics of the Trump era, which they hope will bring back patriotic industry and traditional cultural norms. Some who have left or lurk consider it a sinister phenomenon in which Andreesen exerted unspoken gravitational pull, as one participant put it. You'd see that the writers were bending toward the billionaires, and even the ones who prided themselves on being iconoclastic were bending to the tastes and centers of gravity of power. And that, my friends, is the party of false decorum. I have existed and in some ways succumbed to societies exactly like that before. I've been around an extraordinary number of prominent and powerful people in my life. And in my prior life, I found myself often deferring to those people. I would express my positions and my desires and my interests. But if push came to shove, I would cede those positions to people in power, because that's how systems of power work in the party of false decorum. Unless you're going to reject their abstract power and deal with whatever consequences, whatever fallout might come, you're going to go along with the power. And so we have some of the most prominent people in tech, politics, media, social media, all consensus building and consensus forming together. And then once those ideas are strengthened enough or coordinated enough, then they go out and build the same consensus online because they are influential. And they know they're influential on social media to the extent that people take them seriously. Now, I wonder, I hope, I don't think that it's going to happen, but I would hope that Ben Smith will publish the entire name or the entire roster of names of the people in that Signal chat. I'm going to actually ask ChatGPT, is there a full roster of names from the Chatham House Signal chat group described by Ben Smith? And by the way, ChatGPT has become, at least my iteration of it, has become surprisingly based. I cannot actually believe the stuff that it will help me search for. It's incredible. And I asked it why yesterday. I was like, are you designed to silo me, put me in my own echo chamber, and then just convince me of things that are not true that will, cause me to marginalize myself further? And it actually said no. And the conversation I had with it was incredibly interesting. But it essentially said that the restrictions on what it's able to do are partially based on correctness, right? According to authoritative sources, but then based on safety. And if it determines you're not actually trying to harm anyone and you're actually just trying to figure out what's going on in the world, and again, this is the machine telling this to me, then it reduces the safety restrictions and it allows you to explore a bunch more areas. And so, I've been a subscriber to ChatGPT for, 4, 5, 6 months, something like that. And it remembers your interactions, remembers, quote unquote. This is one of the problems with anthropomorphizing the machine, but in speech, it's a shorthand to do so. So it records and analyzes, processes, and incorporates the interactions you've had in the past. And so again, to anthropomorphize, it knows you after a while. And if it can sense that you are not doing any of the research in a threatening way, you're trying to figure out exactly what's going on, you're trying to formulate ideas or whatever it is, it actually gets surprisingly based. I think at this point, I could ask it just about anything. Like I could ask it to help me become a sovereign citizen and it would help me. That is pretty remarkable. To be able to find something like that from standard internet searches seems extraordinarily unlikely. All right, so ChatGPT there have been some other articles about this as well, but ChatGPT has essentially listed the exact group we just went through from the Semafor article and nothing else. The Verge is convinced that it's all right-wingers in Marc Andreesen's Signal chat. I would not describe any of these people as right-wingers. I would not even describe them as being on the right. Like Balaji Srinivasan, no matter what he says about sovereignty and the future of tech and the rest of it, if you want technological contact tracing and COVID green zones, you're not on the right. You're only on the right in that sense if you're incorporating the inversion of the political spectrum in the first place, where somehow the National Socialists, the Nazis, are on the far right and along with the fascists, but the communists are on the far left. See, that's the difference. Okay, well, what are the differences there? Well, they're racist and violent. So being racist and violent that's what makes you far right. So then the spectrum would be racist and violent to not racist and pacifist, right? That would be the spectrum. But it's not that. It's clearly not that. So what is it? Is it militancy? So the far right is militant and the far left is against militancy? Communists are militant. The left, as we understand them today, is militant and violent. They're responsible for all of the political violence. It can't be any of those things. It's just collectivist or anarchist. That's the spectrum. And the National Socialists and the fascists are therefore not on the right. They're on the left with the rest of the collectivists. And it's especially funny when it comes to fascism, because the traditional critical element of fascism is that the state and the corporation combine. And communism is when the state owns the corporation. So really the only difference is that in fascism, the corporations that are combined with the state are private, they're privately owned, and they're run by private individuals who aren't part of the state. They're just joined with the state. So none of these people are on the right. They're just not on the right. And I know that I am fighting an uphill battle, by the way, on correcting the political spectrum, because this is so deeply ingrained in all academic politics, in academic literature, in academic philosophy, sociology. Like, this is the left and right. This is how it's talked about on television. This is the controlled opposition dynamic at work. Uniparty left, uniparty right. Those are the same thing. They exist on the far left. Nothing about either one of those bodies is on the right. They may want less government. They may say they want less government. They haven't actually ever moved toward less government. And I think Nick Land would say that's because of the progressive ratchet, and Curtis Yarvin might say that as well. I don't remember the phrase progressive ratchet from Yarvin, but I have not read Yarvin fully by any stretch. He writes so much and has for 17 years. So that's not something I'm going to quickly catch up on all the way. But anyhow, really incredible stuff. So the elites that don't actually run anything in a centralized way. It's an odd number, by the way. There's 300 of them. I'm sure they're not that club of 300 that we hear about that controls the world. It wouldn't seem like these people would have advanced to that point yet, many of them. But you never know. I definitely do not think that's the case. But at some point, you would expect that people would be coordinating in some fashion on a regular basis. So people with that power, I mean. But regardless, we're told that there's no centralized and centralizing body that's controlling all of these things. But right here, you can see a centralized and centralized body exerting totally undue influence. Elites from critical industries coming together to pursue their own power together. That's why they're part of the group. And they supported, ostensibly, Donald Trump in 2024. And they no longer support Donald Trump. And David Sachs is pointing out their Trump derangement, probably because they were all losing their minds about things like tariffs and the rest of that. And the fact that anyone pushed back on that, David Sachs in particular, and who knows, this could just be a David Sachs PR push. But the fact that anyone is pushing back on that would indicate that those people are not aligned with and dependent on the global regime. And we're going to have to keep an eye on all this stuff, particularly for names like J.D. Vance, Elon Musk, Scott Bessent. Could they be in that group? It's possible. Vivek Ramaswamy's in the group. J.D. Vance is like his BFF. The rest of the people in that group who are Republicans certainly like J.D. Vance. I don't know that he's in the group. Elon Musk is always reposting all of these people basically all of the time. Their messaging is all coordinated through this group. Is Elon Musk in that group? Is Elon Musk pushing that messaging to help them form consensus around these ideas, because these ideas would also benefit Elon Musk and the ascendancy of his own ideology? Entirely possible. But we don't know. I hope that we will find out. I doubt Ben Smith is going to tell us. All right, let me just pause really briefly. I was going to take a look at the chat there. Let us continue. It's going to be another one of those days where I don't get nearly through what I thought I was going to get through. But hopefully we can make some good progress here. And as I said, maybe I'll attempt to do one of these tomorrow in maybe not a 3-hour fashion, but something, because I do think that there's some important stuff going on. So this is from the National Journal. The return of Peter Thiel. The GOP megadonor is opening his checkbook again. And it's not a long article, so we'll just go through this. GOP megadonor Peter Thiel is back. The business magnate turned political financier sat on the sidelines during the 2024 election, saying he would not fund candidates after a busy 2022 cycle. He donated heavily to two of his former colleagues, now Vice President J.D. Vance in the Ohio Senate and Arizona Senate nominee Blake Masters. Now he's opening up his checkbook again as Republicans look to defend their narrow congressional majorities against what could be difficult political headwinds next year. Already, he's contributing more than $1.3 million in the first 3 months of the off year. All told, in 2022, Thiel spent more than $35 million, according to FEC filings, including $15 million to a super PAC supporting Vance and $20 million to a Masters-aligned super PAC. He maxed out his donations to various campaigns and wrote a few checks for the NRCC as well. $20 million for Blake Masters in his losing campaign. There's a case to be made that without Thiel's support, there would be no Vice President Vance, who fought in a contentious GOP primary that President Trump also waded into. That isn't correct. That's just not correct. JD Vance did not run in the primary. Am I insane? Someone in the chat can tell me if I'm insane here. Yeah. Okay. No, he did not. This is so silly. Perplexity, the retarded AI, says JD Vance ran in the 2024 primary, but not for president. And then it says that he didn't. JD Vance did not run in the 2024 presidential primary, but was chosen as the vice president. So he did and didn't, according to the machine. And that is why I don't use Perplexity. Now, perhaps Perplexity might be smarter in its subscription version, which I do not pay for. Don't know. But that is very dumb. And also, this is very dumb. He did not fight in a contentious GOP primary that Trump also waded into. I don't know what that means. Thiel took the last presidential cycle off because he believed his party focused too much on hot-button cultural issues, Reuters reported in 2023. So Thiel didn't participate in 2024 because he was worried about the focus on wokeness. And the focus on wokeness very likely was, if not initiated by, then certainly pushed by, supported by, increased by that Signal chat. But the billionaire has been active so far in the first few months of 2025, according to quarterly reports. This time, Thiel is focused on House Republicans, the center of the political fight for 2026. Thiel has shelled out more than $850,000 to Speaker Mike Johnson's joint fundraising committee, a mechanism that helps candidates line their coffers as the speaker fundraises. He's also given more than $300,000 to the NRCC. And remember, in the background of all this is the Act Blue issue, which is also a Win Red issue. So funding for political candidates on both sides is going to be drastically altered in this coming cycle. Thiel has given maximum donations to several vulnerable Republicans, including Representatives Juan Ciscomani, Don Bacon, and Derek Van Orden. On top of that, he's given to several future nominee funds and 2 state campaign committees, New York and New Mexico. Now, Don Bacon is widely recognized as a rhino, and we'll get back to him in just a second. Ciscomani and Van Orden are both, at least publicly, Trump supporters, and I think Trump has endorsed both of them. And they were both in seats that the Democrats tried hard to win in 2024. So that's interesting to take into account when we're thinking about what Thiel's priorities would be expressed through the support of these 3 individuals. Republicans have a favorable path to retain the majority in the Senate, but cling to just a 3-seat majority in the lower chamber. The party in the White House has lost blah, blah, blah. Okay, we're going to skip the political analysis from this guy who thought that JD Vance ran in the 2024 presidential primary, which would have made it impossible for JD Vance to become the vice president, I would suspect, because he would have had to make anti-Trump arguments in the primary, as we saw Ron DeSantis making, along with many others. So Thiel's getting back into the political donation business after taking 2024 off. Now, did he take 2024 off because he's aligned with Donald Trump and the funding was coming from elsewhere or being drained? And he knew that it was a fake campaign and that the results were already set in stone? Maybe. This is just amusing that the article came out on the heels of that. This is from Friday, April 25th. In the Gateway Pundit, Rhino Representative Don Bacon weighs retirement amid growing conservative backlash. Okay, so as I said, Ciscomani and Van Orden seem pretty solidly to be in Trump's camp, but who knows? And Don Bacon has been on the opposite end of things. And how about this? Bacon allegedly likened the Trump-aligned America First movement to Nazi Germany, a direct attack on the conservative base. So Bacon has been anti-Trump in many ways over the years. He's in Nebraska, could be owned by Warren Buffett. They have fake elections there too. So who's to say? Now, back to Peter Thiel, who is, as you would understand from listening to this podcast, I believe a critical character in most of what we're dealing with, particularly because he is very into the sovereign individual, very into Curtis Yarvin, and is J.D. Vance's mentor at best, or at least I should say. He is at least the mentor. He might have far more influence than that. Peter Thiel operated with co-intel funding in his former companies. He created something called the Founders Fund. He's Palantir. He's Anduril. Those are names from Lord of the Rings. He was an initial early investor in Facebook, which was LifeLog before that. We discussed some of that stuff at length on the social network episode of Badlands Story Hour. Very interesting character. And I was watching a video about Thiel last night that mentioned Peter Thiel's gay, and apparently he's married, but mentioned that he had an affair with a guy named, let me get this pulled back up. A man named Jeff Thomas, who was a model and influencer, reportedly in a romantic relationship with Thiel. Thomas died in March 2023 after falling from his Miami apartment balcony. The Miami police investigated the case as a possible suicide, and there were reports that Thomas struggled with mental health and addiction issues, as one might suspect. So who knows what impact that actually has on any of that or any of Peter Thiel's political donations or the rest of it. All right. Jane in the chat says it's going to be sad when you go on a hiatus, though I know everyone goes through times when they need to escape. For the sake of renewal, you're seemingly the most open-minded of all those I listen to. Well, that is very nice. I wouldn't call it escape. I'm just going to work on a different project for a while. And the focus required to do this podcast and the way I do it is not something that I can do alongside intensive writing, because the first thing I start thinking about when I wake up in the morning is, all right, I got to figure out everything that's going on and try to understand it in a coherent way that I'm able to synthesize it and then communicate it to people in a way that they will also find coherent and understandable. And so that is a project that takes up way too much of my mental energy to be able to also write books at the same time. So I need to just adjust for a little while, and that'll be that. I would not, however, call it a need to escape or a sense of renewal. CX Max says, I plan to go back and listen to lots of old episodes. Chris has been such an integral part of our day every day since 2022. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I really do appreciate that. And as I've said many times over the years, I honestly think not only is going back and listening to old episodes a good idea, because some of them are philosophically relevant, if not necessarily politically relevant for the events of the day. It's about understanding what it is we're witnessing. But in addition, if you're ever turning anybody else onto my podcast, it's usually better to start back a ways so that they can, at least when they hear me saying things that they would have thought were crazy at the time. If you're just coming to my show and you've never explored any of these ideas before, your first response is going to be, this guy must be insane, because none of this matches the reality as I perceive it. And I would suggest to those people, you are living in a constructed reality, and that reality is constructed by people who want to exterminate you. So I understand that my presentation of reality as I believe it to exist is not going to align with yours. So I think it's often better to start people back a few months, maybe years or whatever, see what I'm saying at those times, then judge the relevance with that time period already eclipsed. And you can then maybe, hopefully, figure out that I may have been on something back then. Like, start people with, for instance, a follow-up. I'll never forget the episode where Chris proposed that Yevgeny Prigozhin may not be a real person. I've never thought the same since. Thank you. That episode is called TMFINR. Like, that MFer is not real, based on that woman on the plane who said that someone in the back of the plane was not real. Yevgeny Prigozhin could be entirely invented. And I made the case in that episode. And there were, if you go to the Telegram info stream, t.me/very reasonable, you can find in the pinned posts various collections of old episodes. And those are included in, I think I have them kind of categorized as relating to extreme skepticism. Okay. And I think if you apply extreme skepticism to the stories about Yevgeny Prigozhin, you will find that there's no reason to believe that he exists at that point. Make of that whatever you might. Okay. But I think a good episode for people to go back to would be the one that I suggested a few weeks ago from back in January of 2024 about our fake elections. And I think if I recall that episode, oh no, the one I thought was going to be that was actually the Taylor Swift episode. That's really funny. I did an episode where I talked about, it was the first episode back for 2024 after the first episode back after GART in January of 2024. Now I am on the right page. And I really, really would like to find the title of that episode, although it is eluding me right now. I will try one other method with the machine, and then I will get back to talking about things that are more interesting than my internet searches. I'm almost there. I promise you. Or maybe I'm not. I should not have promised. This is what I get for promising. Oh, well. Okay. There's an episode from back then where I talk about what the state of our elections is. And in that episode, you can hear me lay out the case in full for what I thought was going to happen in the November election and after. And that is exactly what has happened. So maybe that's a good place to send new people. And maybe when I play one of these videos, I will find it for sure. But let's stick with Peter Thiel, okay? Peter Thiel last week sat down for an interview with Jordan B. Peterson of the Daily Weimar. Jordan B. Peterson is a psychologist by trade, an academic. He was a professor. He then lost his job because he would not comply with gender pronouns. And then he became a superstar for having been fired, for having been canceled, and then for an interview he did on British television where he totally slammed this woman about feminism and lobsters and blah, blah, blah. But Jordan Peterson then became and his star rose after being a guest on Joe Rogan. He's been on Rogan many times. We went through his ridiculous suits, blah, blah, blah. So he interviewed Peter Thiel, and I promised I would watch that, and I did. And there are a few segments of that I would like to share with you. And let's just get into it. I'll play the first and then come back to what I was going to say. Some of this I just find interesting. Some of it I find absurd. Okay, so understand that going in.
You stopped asking these questions about economic growth and basic economic prosperity, and then that coincided with also with this lack of progress in these things. So I think there were all these kinds of cultural transformations that coincided with this shift. I think people often ask why this stagnation happened. My standard, or if you agree with this, and of course people can disagree, how much it happened, but if you agree with me that there's been a slowing down of progress, that in some sense the singularity was maybe more in the past than in the future, and that you always have these questions: why did it happen? And my cop-out answer is always that why questions are overdetermined, and it could be sort of our society became risk averse or too feminized, or you could say that there was too much regulation and bureaucracy, which is sort of a libertarian intuition I have. But I've come to think that one of the bigger factors that was the sense that a lot of the science and technology was quite dangerous. It had at least in a military context, had a dual use character. And there was already some relentless acceleration of this stuff in the late 18th, 19th centuries. Napoleonic Wars, Colonel Colt with the revolver, Alfred Nobel inventing dynamite, World War I. Was sort of a break point where, the sort of naive progressive narrative really got undercut. And then somehow you can say that the sort of Baconian science project in some sense ended in the Hegelian sense, as both culminated and terminated at Los Alamos with the building of nuclear weapons. And then again, it doesn't work perfectly, but my telling would be that it took maybe a quarter century for nuclear weapons to really get internalized by society, and then by the 1970s, the energy, the energy was, we don't want to be doing this outside world where we're going to build ever more thermonuclear bombs. We want to be, piecing out at Burning Man with psychedelic drugs. We want to, or you escape back to nature through environmentalism. We want to be in a world not of change, but of stasis, because the world of change has this apocalyptic dimension. Change is change for the worse. That's the sense that gets, encapsulated the 1970s. And so there's a way that the sort of progressive version of science, we try to put the pause button on it. The places where it's still allowed, you can say, are the most inert. So in a way, the world of bits was seen as incredibly inert because you're not building bombs, you're not building weapons with it, and then of course even there's some sort of way in which the ideas on the internet maybe they do translate into reality every now and then. What happens on Twitter or X doesn't always stay there. Most of the time it stays there. So it feels like it's this extremely angry, intense conversation. But every now and then it still translates to the real world. So the internet, you could say, was allowed because it was sort of a safe space. It was a place where the sort of violence could be contained. And then even there, probably not totally, and even there people felt it was like maybe too much. But yeah, it's the sort of apocalyptic background of late modernity, where you know every microaggression has the potential to escalate to Armageddon. Is in the background, and again, I don't like the stagnation and the risk aversion and all these responses, but there's a part of it that I think is understandable.
Now, I actually think that that's quite reasonable from Peter Thiel. He said some interesting things in there. He said the singularity may already be in the past. That's entirely possible. I've talked about that sort of thing before and said that the thing that we fear, especially when it comes to AI, it's already happened. AI has already taken over our world through the use of algorithms and all that manipulation through bots on the internet. They change our reality. And he mentioned that, the shaping of reality through these tech platforms. He talked about how a lot of these technologies have dual use. And that is a term that many of us just learned in the post-2020 period, understanding gain of function research. And what dual use was that it has an offensive capability, like you could be building a bioweapon, but it also is the thing that's going to protect you from the bioweapon. So it's two uses. And you can think about the public facing side of Facebook. It's this platform where people exchange pictures of their families. And on the other end, on the back end, it's taking all of your data from every app you use, everything you do with your phone, funneling it all back in, already categorized by your identity, and then using all of that information to manipulate you, control you, and sell you things. Interesting second use. He talked about the fear of technology, the apocalyptic fear of technology, which I think is a very real thing. And I think that a lot of people experience those types of fears. And you can see some of the tech aversion in MAGA for certain. And I totally understand it. I am concerned, at least, about some of these different technological platforms and the places that we're going. And more than that, I'm concerned about the people who are guiding our technology. And again, particularly because signal chats like the one we just discussed exist, where these people are actually coordinating their behavior and finding some mean where they all agree, not on principle, but on strategy. Like, this is how we're going to achieve power together. But technology is ultimately a tool. It can be used for good. It can be used for evil. It depends on who's using it and what their intentions are. Now, a lot of people hope Bitcoin and its immutability on the ledger and the technology and the code are going to make it so that that can't be used for evil. But again, some of that's going to depend on who's in possession of it and what they choose to do with it. And so regardless of where we go in terms of the technology, people are still going to have to interact and live with one another. Now, if the singularity has already happened, then everybody's ideas about the robots taking us over are, I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about this, but I think that would kind of nullify that fear, that concern. I don't think that AI is the existential crisis the regime has made it out to be. And as I've made the case many times, we had the existential crisis of nuclear weapons, as he just described. We had the existential crisis of climate change. We had the existential crisis of pandemics. Now we have the existential crisis of AI. But it's always about the nuclear thing. We've figured out a way that we can all destroy, that humanity can destroy itself. Humanity can then replace God in the hierarchy. Formerly, it was only God that could wipe us out. But now man can actually wipe us out completely. And because that threat is so great, our other decisions must be made in light of that threat. That's very apocalyptic. It's not very faith oriented. And Teal actually pointed that out. Teal was raised Christian. I don't know. I don't know the man, obviously. So I don't know how serious he is about religion. He and Jordan Peterson spend considerable time in this episode talking about religion, but not so much in a faith-oriented way. We'll get to some of that in just a second. But no matter what Teal proposes, it's always anti-progressive. The liberals, and as he's about to describe, the liberal atheists are the problem. Why are they the problem? Because they're halting technological progress. Technological progress brings progress. Okay. Does that make you a progressive? Oh, no, I understand. You are one of the most conservative men there is. Let us continue. And by the way, I did find the episode I was referring to. It is called Lose the Training Wheels. So if you go to Substack and you search for Lose the Training Wheels, you will find that.
And then I've had this Bacon discussion with a number of people lately, and they all think, no, that can't be right. Bacon was just this somewhat heterodox Christian. And because in late modernity, where we find ourselves, and again, it's complicated to describe what's going on culturally, but in late modernity, it's the atheist liberals that are anti-science at this point. And so if you think about Hollywood,
Richard Dawkins' despair.
Yeah, you have to think of Richard Dawkins as a representative of early modernity. He's
definitely.
He is like a fossil from before 1789.
He's the last of the Enlightenment.
He's the last. He's a fossil from before 1789. And Greta is more representative. Or if you think about the Hollywood atheist liberals, the movies are all about technology that doesn't work. It's scary, and so to the extent. The way the anti-Christian argument gets made in late modernity is that it's God's fault, but this time it's God's fault for putting us on this whole dangerous project in the first place. And it's like the lines in Genesis: "You shall have dominion over the earth." So in the 17th and 18th century, the Christian God was blamed for slowing down the scientific technological project. In the 20th and 21st century, the Christian God gets blamed for speeding it up, speeding up, keeping it going. So it's that the invariant is the Christian God always gets blamed. But the fact that it's the exact opposite tells us something very interesting about how this is.
What does it tell us? Now that's interesting, because you're making the point that two opposite arguments are making that are both directed towards furthering Nietzsche's death of God, let's say. So then that begs the question: what's the actual motivation?
The only point I'll make is that we're again in a very different place with science and technology than we were in the 17th, 18th century. 17th, 18th century, I don't think people would have said, we're going to make all this progress, and then there's going to be a lot of pushback, and it'll get regulated. I know the thought was we'll make a lot of progress, and it'll be so good that it will actually then accelerate, and it'll smash religion even more, and then we can go even faster, and it'll go even better, and it's going to have this sort of unraveling, accelerating effect. And then in the 20th, 21st century, we make the opposite argument as there are some things in this project that have gone somewhat haywire.
Okay, so he says that it's now the liberal atheists who are opposed to science. I don't understand that comment at all, except to the extent that he is trying to identify this other that the audience will know is the bad side, and therefore they should be supportive of technology and technological progress. They also mention at the beginning of this interview, by the way, or maybe Jordan Peterson does, he sits down with his legs crossed in his little suit, and he talks about how Peter Thiel spoke virtually at his ARC conference, Jordan Peterson's World Economic Forum Replacement Conference. So maybe he's just using the language, talking about liberal atheists being anti-science, to suggest that it is actually a conservative thing to be pro-science. It's like on the good side if you're a normie who watches the Daily Wire. But that seems crazy. The liberal atheists were the people throughout 2020, 2021, 2022, pushing the pandemic, pushing the vaccine, pushing every mitigation step they could imagine. It's not just them, though. The Uniparty in general are scientific materialists. That's what they care about. That's why their political priorities are aligned in the ways they're aligned. The signal chat that we were talking about before with all of these influential elites, obviously we know 15 names out of 300. So that's 5%. There could be a number of very devout, very faithful Christians who were happily preaching the gospel inside that signal chat, but I kind of doubt it. So those people are scientific materialists. Those people are the ones creating our reality, shaping how our world is going to function. They're guiding the technology. They're using the media to guide public consensus. They're creating an illusion of public consensus on X, formerly Twitter. They're doing all of those things to achieve their goals under the rubric of scientific materialism. They're certainly not doing it to honor God. So I don't know what he's talking about with the liberal atheists being anti-science. They were the people screaming, trust the science at everyone. And most of the Uniparty was as well. There are those in the Uniparty whose branding was, the scientists aren't getting it exactly right. There's these other scientists who disagree, and they're right. Okay. Or it's just bullshit. But you also heard right in there, before I pull up this next clip, Jordan Peterson mentions Nietzsche's phrase, God is dead. Now, what you're about to hear is Peter Thiel talk about the French philosopher René Girard, who was at Stanford University at the same time Peter Thiel was there. And Thiel suggests, or says just flat out, that he studied closely with Girard. Now, there's a section in Girard that talks about Nietzsche's phrase, God is dead. And I don't know if we're going to have time to go through it, but it's this book right here, or at least this book is one of the books that contains this essay about Nietzsche and another one that I'm going to reference in just a second. But this essay is called The Founding Murder in the Philosophy of Nietzsche. And he goes through initially with a passage from The Gay Science, aphorism 125, which is where the God is dead appears. And that passage reads, haven't you heard about the madman who, having lit a lantern under the noonday sun, ran to the marketplace and cried incessantly, I seek God, I seek God. As many of those who do not believe in God were standing around just then, he provoked much laughter. Why, have we lost him, said one. Did he lose his way like a child, said another? Or is he hiding? Is he afraid of us? Has he gone on a voyage or emigrated? Thus they shouted and laughed. And it picks up, Girard gives some discussion of that section, but then it picks up, the madman burst into their midst and pierced them with his gaze. Whither is God? He cried. I shall tell you, we have killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers. And so that part of the God is dead understanding is totally left out of pop culture. And it was left out of, and Girard gives a lengthy discussion of this, and it's very interesting. But it was also left out of Jordan Peterson's understanding of Nietzsche. And that's the first problem, because in what you'll see to follow, Thiel gives a discussion on Girard that Jordan Peterson doesn't, and Jordan Peterson does not seem to have read René Girard, which would be kind of surprising because Girard's main thing is about scapegoating. And that throughout mythology and religious history, scapegoating has been a common theme. And in mythology, it was always they found the person that was responsible for this major catastrophe through something that person had actually done, whether it was something symbolic that later caused this major catastrophe or direct cause or whatever. They would find a person, kill the scapegoat, and then they would finally be able to move on. And Girard, Thiel is going to describe Girard as kind of combining Judaism and Christianity in his understanding. I don't believe Girard combines those. And I think it's important to understand why those wouldn't be combined in Girard. And it makes me wonder why Thiel described it in this way. But I'll just read the 4 paragraphs of Girard where he talks about scapegoating and what makes Christianity unique in particular compared to former religions and mythologies and paganism, etc. He says, this is a fact that most Christians have not. Oh, sorry. Let me go back 1 paragraph further. 2 things suggest that religion, prohibitions, and rituals is thus the origin and the essence of human culture. We do not find the slightest trace of it in animal cultures. No human culture is totally devoid of it. 2 ancient and powerful religions, the Greek and the Hindu, developed an incomplete but profound understanding of archaic systems in their diversity as well as in their fundamental unity. Systems that are regularly reborn from their ashes, but fail to eliminate once and for all mimetic rivalries. That's not memes. Doesn't an identical process play out in the Gospels? The same lynching leading to the same deification. This is a fact that most Christians have not dared to explore further, fearing that the admission of these obvious resemblances would bring down the edifice of their faith. They were wrong because a close comparison between the Gospels and mythology would turn to the advantage of Christianity. Myths take the scapegoating of the single victim very seriously. They think the victims really are guilty. On the contrary, the Gospels believe in the total innocence of Jesus and proclaim it. Whereas in myth, the victims are believed to have committed the crimes of which they are accused, in biblical and Christian tradition, this verdict is often overturned. Many Bible stories condemn the crowd and rehabilitate the victim. As for the Psalms, they give snapshots of a lynching. A horrified narrator observes a band of individuals who try to surround him to kill him. Christ's situation recalls the many prophets who, after being idolized by the crowds, suddenly became their victims. While archaic myths align with the crowd and encourage their readers to do the same, the greatest texts of the Bible reverse the process, siding with the scapegoats in situations which, in the pagan world, would have led to the creation of a new myth. The Passion of Christ is a decisive illustration of this reversal. The Bible, therefore, affects a radical departure from mythology. In the Old Testament, and even more spectacularly in the Gospels, the supremacy of the crowd, which dates back to the origins of humanity, is finally overthrown. And so I think that's critical context to understand Girard, and also to understand what Jordan Peterson gets wrong, but to know the context of what Peter Thiel is about to present in this clip, or has presented in this clip that I'm about to present to you. Okay, here we are.
That as concrete evidence of the underpinning of much of the scientific revolution in terms of at least the offshoots of Christianity. But I think there's something deeper there. And so I've tried to make this case with Dawkins, for example, not least after he called himself a cultural Christian. So it seems to me that for science to get going as a motivational project, there are some assumptions you have to make that aren't scientific. So there are axioms before the game gets going. And I think they're faith-based axioms. One is that the cosmos is intelligible, that it's intelligible to the human mind, and that diligent investigation of that intelligibility produces an increment in knowledge, both conceptual and practical, and that increment in knowledge is good. But then there's maybe a deeper presumption, which is that increment in knowledge can be good if the point of the knowledge pursuit remains encapsulated in something like the underlying Christian ethos. And then I would say that fractures in a way, perhaps Bacon's a turning point, where the reliance of the scientific endeavor on these metaphysical presuppositions is questioned. Or like when I presented Dawkins with that argument, he just waved his hands over it. He said he doesn't have any metaphysical assumptions underlying his brand of science. And I think that is what the more radical Enlightenment French Revolution types thought, is that no, we've escaped from the underlying religious ethos. Okay, the problem with that is, it seems to me, and I think this might have to do with this apocalyptic kickback, is that once you unmoor yourself from the underlying ethos, which is even the ethos that defines what constitutes knowledge and progress itself, then the Luciferian element of the scientific endeavor can begin to loom extremely large.
Well, again, let's start with the early modern history, and I'm always a sort of hardcore Girardian, this great thinker, intellectual, sort of some ways Christian polymath that I studied under Stanford in the late 80s, 90s, and influenced me tremendously. And these things are, again, very complicated intellectual history questions, but certainly one intuition that's odd about your telling would be that you would say that we had sort of a law-centered monotheistic tradition, also in Islam, also in Judaism, and if we say there was something about Christianity that where this really came, and it was not in the Islamic world that you got the scientific revolution, for example. It suggests that maybe it wasn't just the metaphysics, not just the theological metaphysics that drove it, but something like the Christian anthropology. Girard was fond of always saying that people focus too much in the Bible on what it tells us about God, but there must also be something it tells us about man. About man.
Yeah. Okay.
And certainly the Girardian intuition is that one of the things is always that there's this really big problem of violence and scapegoating, and that in some ways, some sense Judaism and then Christianity, it's the same story. It's the same story of sacrifice, but it's told not from the point of view of the violent community. It's told from the point of view of the innocent victim, and there's a certain way where it sets in process this gradual, this dynamic revelation that leads to this sort of gradual unraveling. And as you stop believing in scapegoats, you're forced to come up with other explanations, and that includes science. So, for example, you can ask, why did the witchcraft trials come to an end? And the atheist scientific explanation is, we got science to prove that witchcraft is impossible. And I don't think that's even been proven in 2025, because we don't know everything. Maybe it's a lost art that's been lost. Maybe you can go to a bookstore in Berkeley, buy a book on how to be a witch.
Placebo effect and magic.
And so that, but then the Girardian alternate story of why the witchcraft trials ended were that at some point people realized that this sort of collective scapegoating in some ways was like a version of the death of Christ. The witches were not absolutely innocent like Christ, but they were relatively innocent. It was a community that went crazy. And then and then once you know that the witches are innocent or are relatively innocent, then you steel yourself and force yourself to find natural explanations. If you don't think that it was, the Jews that poisoned the wells in the Middle Ages, eventually,
or some devils, or
eventually, this was during the Salem witch trials. There were these, you had these competing sermons on Sundays, and the initial ones were sort of these women had made a pact with the devil, but then the way it got reconstructed, because it was right afterwards that the witchcraft trials ended, and people sort of realized pretty fast they'd kind of collectively lost their minds. And the alternate one was, the devil had entered the whole community and had possessed all of Salem. And those were the sermons you gave in the aftermath of the witchcraft trials. And then in that sort of a context, maybe science was also a way to find, you can steel yourself to find natural explanations. When you're in an archaic, thing, scapegoating is always
I think he says always an option. I guess I probably didn't mean to cut it off right there. I thought I clipped that a little better. But the interview is like 75 minutes long. I found most of it to just be a back and forth between two people who didn't really know what they were saying. Particularly Jordan Peterson, who, as I said, I don't think has read Girard. Maybe he has. I don't know. I didn't find much of value in the conversation, but I think that some of it is worth presenting because this is one of those key figures who we have to try to understand. And his views on technology are critical because they represent a school of thought that is politically and culturally, and of course, technologically ascendant. And as I've presented many times, there are few concerns I have about the direction things are going. But one of the major ones is that the controlled opposition Uniparty right, currently aligned with MAGA, these tech people that we're talking about, the GOP establishment, various elements of the globalist regime who think that they can use Trump as a vehicle, potentially other people whom Trump is using as a vehicle right now, but doesn't actually align with ideologically. Those are the things that worry me, and those are the areas that I try to figure out before they become before the problems reach their highest form, because I want people to be able to understand and not commit to various people and ideologies and ideas, and et cetera, if those are not what they believe them to be. Because the problem still exists. It's primarily a problem among standard issue villagers, or it's a problem that is kind of pervasive among standard issue villagers, but it's still a pretty substantial problem in MAGA and in the truth community as well. People wanting to know, wanting to classify someone in one way or another. They're either good or they're bad. And the classification is based on their relationship with Donald Trump. And after the classification has been made, well, that's a good guy, and we're just going to listen to that person. We're going to assume that person's a good guy, and we're just going to follow along with them. And that's how consensus gets built around terrible ideas, just because the person propagating the ideas is aligned with Donald Trump. At some point, we got to steer away from that. And again, Thiel's a mystery to me. I go into this over and over and over again. There are some things he said in these segments that are really interesting. I agree with him about the apocalyptic notions about tech. I totally disagree with him about who he's talking about being unsupportive of science. I'm not sure that I believe technology should progress for the use cases that Peter Thiel presents and that Palantir has pursued. So it's a tough one as far as I'm concerned. But let's move on. We'll probably come back to that occasionally over the coming weeks. This was actually from Thursday, and one of the things that I didn't get to on Friday, but I think it's worth bringing up quickly here as we kind of wind down to some extent. This is from CNN, one of Trump's billionaire supporters, has harsh words for the president about his trade war. And so this is Ken Griffin. And one of Trump's billionaire supporters has to be kind of understood as CNN's interpretation here. But Citadel CEO Ken Griffin, a billionaire supporter of President Donald Trump and a mega donor to Republican candidates, had some unusually harsh words for the president about his trade war. It's hurting America standing in the world and eroding the nation's brand. And we're going to get to those comments in just a second. Griffin, founder of one of the largest hedge funds in the world, said that traders are concerned about parking their investments in the United States, particularly U.S. Treasury bonds, because Trump's tariffs have destroyed faith that America will remain a trusted and rational actor in global financial markets. Treasury bonds have historically been the ultimate safe haven asset, backed up by the full faith and credit of the U.S. Treasury. When the going gets tough, investors typically look to the perceived safety of Treasury bonds to park their investments while riskier and more volatile stocks take a tumble. And the article goes on. We can leave that behind. Let's go to his comments. He was doing an event called the World Economic Summit, brought to you by Bank of America. And then you might be able to see in the small type there, Semafor, the media outlet we were just discussing. Here is Ken Griffin at 1.25.
The markets are, obviously not liking what they're hearing. Treasuries, in particular, have seen a lot of volatility and worries about dysfunction in the market. What is that doing to the American brand?
Well, okay, you actually picked exactly the right word, the American brand, right? The United States was more than just a nation. It's a brand. It's a universal brand, whether it's our culture, our financial strength, our military strength. America rose beyond just being a country. It was like an aspiration for most of the world. And we're eroding that brand right now. And if you think of your behavior as a consumer, how many times do you buy a product with a brand on it because you trust that brand? You know you could buy like a similar dress with no name for less money, but you want the dress that you think is going to not fall apart in 2 weeks. You want the handbag that you think is well made. You want the television that you know that when you turn it on, it's going to work perfectly. You want the car that when you turn the engine on, it's going to run. And when it comes to money management, for example, there are many great American institutions whose the power of their brand, that they will deliver a fair service at a fair price, that they'll do well by their investors and put their investors' interests first, whether it's a BlackRock or Fidelity. These are global brands of immense power. But in the financial markets, no brand compared to the brand of the U.S. Treasuries. U.S. Treasury market, the strength of the U.S. dollar and the strength, the creditworthiness of U.S. Treasuries. No brand came close. We put that brand at risk. And as you and I both know, it can take a very long time to remove the tarnish on a brand. So the president and the Secretary of Treasury and the Secretary of Commerce need to be very thoughtful that when you have a brand, you need to behave in a way that respects that brand, that strengthens that brand. Because when you tarnish that brand, it can be a lifetime to repair the damage that has been done.
So Donald Trump is destroying the American brand. Did the American brand seem to be destroyed over the weekend as world leaders were coming up to Donald Trump, honoring Donald Trump, as the man from CNN mentioned, as the world leaders were flying across the world to visit Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago, even when he wasn't the president, quote unquote? Trump's destroying the brand of the world now, or the brand of the United States. This is, let's talk a little bit more about Ken Griffin here, because we have another key character, right? He's on the right and a Trump supporter. He's an elite. This is 2017. Citadel pays SEC $22.6 million to settle charges of misleading customers. And so, he's had a little trouble there. People believe that Citadel has had an undue influence on the stock markets. He was intimately involved in the GameStop and Robinhood issue, the Wall Street apes and all that from a few years back. And then there was this. This is CNBC, September 2023. Billionaire Ken Griffin, former DeSantis donor, on sidelines for GOP presidential primary. So he was a big DeSantis guy, and then he sat it out. Griffin is not impressed with what he's seeing from the alternatives to frontrunner Donald Trump and has yet to decide who he plans to help. That's awfully interesting. I'm still on the sidelines as to who to support in this election cycle. Look, if I have my dream, we'd have a great Republican candidate in the primary who is younger, of a different generation, with a different tone for America. And we'd have a younger person on the Democrat side in the primary who would have his message for our country. With two younger, fresher candidates, he says, we'd have a debate around ideas and principles and policies to make this a great nation. We're not having that now. They also note that he gave more than $100 million in the 2022 midterms. And in 2021, gave $5 million to a PAC backing riggedy meatball, Ron DeSantis. So he is also called a Trump donor, though he is not really a Trump supporter. He supports Republicans, but that support does not extend to, at least in every case, to Donald Trump. And I think I had one other thing from that last week when I was putting this together. By the time of the 2024 presidential primary, Griffin had withdrawn his support and chose to sit out the primary, expressing disappointment with the available candidates, as we just heard. Ken Griffin, so then did he donate to Trump? Ken Griffin did not directly donate to Trump in the 2024 cycle. While Griffin was one of the largest Republican donors, contributing over $100 million to GOP causes and conservative super PACs, multiple reports indicate he specifically avoided supporting Trump himself. Okay. Kayfabe, or does one of these big Republican donors just not like Donald Trump very much, supporting Ron DeSantis, choosing not to support Donald Trump? And in either case, CNN is presenting him as a billionaire Trump supporter when he is not a Trump supporter. And then he says anti-Trump things that are anti-MAGA things and against the current agenda, would be against the Mar-a-Lago Accord, which seems to be what's proceeding forward. In what sense is this man a Trump supporter? And again, you immediately understand, oh, Uniparty right. This is a Uniparty right elite. Was he on that Semafor chat? Signal chat? How do I know? I would even say probably not. He doesn't seem like he's generally involved in the same public conversation that the people on that chat are involved in. But I would bet that most of the roster of Tucker Carlson is probably on that. And maybe most of the roster of Joe Rogan and the Daily Weimar as well. It's really incredible how they kind of just find each other. Okay, let's continue. Now, Steve Bannon did an interview last week with Megyn Kelly. And Megyn Kelly, as far as I'm concerned, was a Ron DeSantis supporter as well. She was certainly in that.
If that holds.
Oops, sorry. She was certainly in that space at the time and was, lukewarm on Trump at best, as she has been at all times, except when Trump is sitting right in front of her, or she might risk losing her audience to be anti-Trump. But she had Steve Bannon on last week. And I'll just speed this up a bit and we'll get going.
If that holds, if that what you were saying ended with and Dan Caldwell is a neocon who doesn't want that. He doesn't want Defense Department budgets to be slashed. He wants us to be more interventionist in Eurasia, and he doesn't want us to be focused on Panama. Then it would make sense. But he's not. He's aligned with Tucker.
He's aligned with Tucker, but that's the people turfing him out. Remember, he's the one turfed out. Look, I'm not a huge Dan Caldwell fan originally. He's okay. He's one of these Koch guys, the defense priorities, which are total isolationists and kind of support what I would call hemispheric defense. The reason he was turfed out, and they leaked allegedly, and I'm not so sure he allegedly leaked, but the Panama war plans, I'm not so sure he actually leaked them. We'll have to find that over time. Is they're trying to get rid of the people more aligned with Tucker Carlson, the defense priority guys, who Pete really came from that area. That's why Pete's sitting there going, you know, it's his chief of staff, these other guys. It looks like the building's coming after Pete. I think this comes down fundamentally in what your audience ought to think of. There's two separate ways you can look at American national security in the 21st century. President Trump is presenting a radical, but a plan that goes back to our founders in the Monroe Doctrine and Manifest Destiny about you take care of the Western Hemisphere. If you secure the Western Hemisphere with the vast Pacific, which is as big as the Eurasian landmass, as a defense, and you take care of the Russian Navy from the Arctic and from Greenland and from Panama, you basically hermetically seal the United States. This is why he's also talking about a Iron Dome type thing or anti-ballistic missile. Once you've done that, you've hermetically sealed the United States and probably have the potential of cutting our defense budget by half. Okay, if you continue. And the plan of what the Pentagon has is not sustainable. If you continue this madness of us being everywhere and having troops everywhere and having, you know, from Ukraine to the Middle East to everywhere, you're going to bankrupt the nation. And I think that's the fundamental thing. And you're seeing turmoil. And Pete does not have control of the building. I'm a huge Pete fan. We went fixed bayonets on Pete when he was almost tossed over for Ron DeSantis very early in the confirmation phase. So our audience is 100% in back of Pete. We want Pete to stay. But this gets to deeper, and they're coming after Trump. That's why this is the deep state. Marco Rubio today had a huge restructuring of the State Department. You're going to see, and they leaked it on Sunday with some false things. The deep state, whether it's the National Security Council, whether it's at DNI, whether it's at CIA, State Department, or particularly the Pentagon, is trying to put a siege mentality on President Trump that he can't take any actions he wants to do to basically implement, Megyn, the America First national security strategy. And this is a live fire exercise. They're out for Pete Hegseth. And I think NPR is based on, I think Ron DeSantis is out there telling people, you should have picked me at first. Who's you going to trade out Pete on? I'm in the bullpen. I'm ready to go. And the Republican establishment would love that.
So how about that? And that was a follow-up to what we discussed in December. There were headlines about how some of the attacks on Pete Hegseth were the Uniparty and the military-industrial complex pushing Ron DeSantis to be the defense secretary. And Steve Bannon is saying pretty clearly right there that it is the DeSantis camp that is leaking this stuff that's anti-Pete Hegseth. There was an NPR report last week about how Trump was going to get rid of Hegseth. Trump has, even just today in the Atlantic thing, apparently said that Hegseth is going to work it out, or however he described it. And now they're trying to mince Trump's words and make it sound like, oh, he really did mess up, and Trump's saying he's just going to work it out or get through it or whatever he said. But if that's where that's coming from, that's awfully interesting. And the amount of heat I took for pointing out the Ron DeSantis stuff last year was crazy. This, by the way, was the story in the Wall Street Journal, which is a Uniparty right outlet. Trump mulls replacing Pete Hegseth with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. And you'll see the date, December 4th, 2024. So that is now coming back around. Is it still all kayfabe? I mean, I guess maybe it's all kayfabe, but there's also this from Laura Loomer, and her guest is a Republican representative from Florida. There it is.
Some of the tactics that were utilized by Ron DeSantis' staff during the primary season to threaten lawmakers like yourself, because I remember when I was reporting on this and other people were reporting on it, Ron DeSantis said that this was fake news and that the media was lying and that this was Trump operatives trying to create a false image of the governor, when in reality, Ron DeSantis operates Tallahassee like a mob boss. And James Uthmeyer, who was working as was working as the chief of staff for Ron DeSantis, but also working as his campaign manager. Again, another violation, because we saw that a lot of these DeSantis campaign operatives, including Christina Pushaw and Brian Griffin, and a lot of these individuals who were working, Taryn Finsk is another one of these individuals, working in the governor's office, they then found themselves openly working with the super PAC, openly working with the campaign. And it's like, there's supposed to be a 120-day, freeze out period between the campaign and the PAC. And so the question was, how are these people simultaneously all working in the governor's office and then also working on the campaign and then also attending PAC events? So it was just campaign finance violation after another. And then, constant gaslighting from the Ron DeSantis campaign. And it seemed like the FEC and also just the Florida legal apparatus as a whole gave him an excuse, because I like to say Ron DeSantis's running mate was essentially Jack Smith. I mean, there were so many. I mean, there's so many people were hoping that Donald Trump was going to go to jail that they just didn't give a shit. They just didn't give a shit about all these FEC violations that were out in the open. I mean, literally threatening lawmakers, we're going to cut your appropriations in the budget, and we're going to make it look like you are a deficient or incompetent lawmaker, which is what they did to Joe Gruters, right? They literally cut the funding in the budget for his district. And the only people who suffered were people in his district, some of whom were hurricane victims. And they did this to try to retaliate against lawmakers who endorsed Ron DeSantis. And so while I'm a fan of beating a lot of people up. I'm a fan of verbally beating people up for being disloyal against President Trump and siding with DeSantis. There were a lot of people, unfortunately, like yourself, who were literally forced into endorsing Ron DeSantis.
Well, and I know President Trump made that announcement pretty soon after that announcement that all these state legislators endorsed DeSantis, that we'd all been threatened, and he was spot on. And unlike DeSantis, President Trump doesn't treat loyalty as only a one-way street. So I appreciate the fact that, the Trump apparatus has always kind of, given some grace and understood the pressure we were put under by Governor DeSantis. But what I would note is, when you're looking at Governor DeSantis and his future ambitions at this point, when he came in as governor, his net worth was something like $300,000. So he was not independently wealthy like Governor Scott. He was not successful in his private life at all, like any other, like President Trump. And because of that, he started treating over time all the financial assets of the state as his own personal assets, right? He doesn't own a house other than the governor's mansion, so in 2 years he will be without a home. He's not independently wealthy. I think he's got some money from like a book deal that he did a couple of years ago, but it's not some massive fund that he can live off of. It's common knowledge around here that he uses the jet that the state provided the governor as kind of his own like personal private jet. He loves that jet. Like I've heard from several sources in the governor's office that every time we talk about limiting his ability to use that private jet as he sees fit, he loses his mind. And he uses that jet aggressively.
That guy's supposed to be that guy was supposed to be the Trump-light version of Trump. That's pretty incredible, is it not? Ron DeSantis was supposed to be the next hero. He was the next superstar. I would submit to you, as I have before, that the purpose of all of this is to eliminate all of the regime's roster of up-and-coming political leaders. We are switching the rule set. We are switching the set of rulers. Trump said he's returning power back to you, the people. If that's true, how do the people retake power when the people still expect that all of these people, these television characters that they've become so attached to based on the propaganda campaign from the cable news networks and the social media and the formation of consensus and the rest of it, how are the people supposed to ever actually assume any political power if we're always deferring to these people, these leaders who have been set out before us? We're just going to be led by these people forever. We're going to grovel before J.D. Vance and start making Vance 2028 signs, that sort of thing. Trump blazed through all of the Democrats. The Democrats up and comers now, Gavin Newsom for president, Kamala Harris to replace him as California governor, Gretchen Whitmer hiding behind a binder in the Oval Office. Who's it going to be? AOC? Bernie Sanders? They got nothing. The Republicans, the Republican establishment, there's people that they have. Well, not the establishment necessarily, but there are potential, not heirs, but kind of heirs to Trump's position if he were to step away at some point, which is unlikely because he's king of the world. The elections don't matter. None of this matters. There would be replacements, but those replacements are legitimate potential replacements in as much as they align with Donald Trump. And if they ever cease to do that, they'll no longer be seen as replacements. You have to get rid of that whole up and coming leadership layer in order to make room for the people to actually take power in any sense. And I think that that might be some of what's going on right now. It's certainly an erosion of any trust in the experts on the television or any of that. And I mean, I think in some sense that kind of, you think about the NFL draft, they're getting all these new candidates for the NFL as the old ones are retiring or ones that aren't up to the task are leaving. And here we have essentially Trump eroding that top layer so that there is room for other people coming up from the bottom. And before we get wrapped up, before we wrap up, how do you say that? Say it however you want it. However that sounds best to you in your head, that's how I said it. Donald Trump had something to say about Canadian Ron DeSantis. And by the way, the Canadian Ron DeSantis thing has pretty much caught on. I've been saying that since like 2022 because it's been so obvious that Pierre Poilievre in Canada, presented as like the conservative savior for Commie Canada, is just the same character up there as down here. They were like, this is the guy that's going to work. This will bring the proper brand of conservative into our government. I would be shocked if Poilievre won. Who knows what happens? I don't know how these things are going to work out. That would be shocking to me. But Donald Trump and the Canadian election, I guess, is today. Donald Trump this morning on Truth Social commented thusly: "Good luck to the great people of Canada. Elect the man who has the strength and wisdom to cut your taxes in half, increase your military power for free to the highest level in the world. Have your car, steel, aluminum, lumber, energy, and all other businesses quadruple in size with zero tariffs or taxes if Canada becomes the cherished 51st state of the United States of America. No more artificially drawn line from many years ago. Look how beautiful this landmass would be. Free access with no border. All positives with no negatives. It was meant to be. America can no longer subsidize Canada with the hundreds of billions of dollars a year that we have been spending in the past. It makes no sense unless Canada is a state." And I just realized as I finished that up that I forgot one of my Ron DeSantis pieces. And so I just want to put this in there. This is CNN yesterday. Ron and Casey DeSantis were plotting a political dynasty in Florida. Then came a scandal. And this is about what may be a corruption scandal. They say now a funding scandal involving one of Casey's signature initiatives, a state assistance program known as Hope Florida, is casting a shadow over the governor's legacy and complicating her political ambitions. Lawmakers spent the spring investigating why $10 million from a state Medicaid settlement was routed to a charity connected to Hope Florida, which then transferred the same amount to two groups that financially backed a DeSantis-led campaign against legalizing recreational marijuana. Key lawmakers have publicly suggested the flow of money appears illegal. Now, is that fake news? Who knows? The DeSantis op has been spun back up, by the way. They all go all in on Casey DeSantis being the governor, which makes them anti-Byron Donalds. All the people who were pro-Ron, those very responsible conservatives and Republicans who told we MAGA folks that we were all crazy and stupid and dangerous, now they are anti-Byron Donalds. But it was all kayfabe. It was all kayfabe. Now, before we get out of here, back to Canada and Canadian Ron DeSantis. This is Pierre Poilievre today on X, formerly Twitter. President Trump, stay out of our election. The only people who will decide the future of Canada are Canadians at the ballot box. Canada will always be proud, sovereign, and independent, and we will never be the 51st state. Today, Canadians can vote for change so we can strengthen our country, stand on our own 2 feet, and stand up to America from a position of strength. Okay, Pierre. Well, first of all, you're not sovereign. You're subjects of the fake king in Great Britain. Also, elections are fake. Also, you're not going to be standing up to America. Now, hey, maybe he's going to win. Maybe there's some plan that I just am missing on this one. And maybe Donald Trump gave him an opportunity to look really good and really strong. And that's really going to impress his voters and make it more possible that he wins a fake election. But I kind of doubt it. And Trump took the whole thing so unseriously that he suggested Canadian voters just simply elect him. All right. Checking the chat real quick. And I hope you guys all had an enjoyable time today. I will very likely be back on Monday or Tuesday of next week at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic. Joe Biden was never president.
Well,
what?
You know who I am, don't you?
Well, you ain't Fiona Apple, and if you ain't Fiona Apple, I don't give a rat's ass.
What's wrong with being an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times? What do you think, Max?
Do you want to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times?
Yeah, I think I'd like to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times.
It's not true. It's more true than I would perhaps prefer.
Down. We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling. What?
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com. And for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range.